Wizard, I can refine everything. In a world of endless star fields and interdimensional wars, the wizard's floating city conquered one world after another. At the Wizard Academy, through blood-stained exams, the towering wizard tower sent wizards batch after batch. Becoming an apprentice wizard, Richard activated the miracle furnace deep within his soul, where constant refining of materials granted him knowledge and skills. The veteran's weapon could be refined into legendary martial arts techniques. The ancient wizard's encrypted notes could be refined into lost knowledge. The remains of brutal monsters could be refined into monster bloodlines. In this era of great voyages in the wizarding world, Richard was destined to become a leader of his time. Chapter 1. Spiritual Power Test. Heason Ridge was particularly cold in winter, the snow blowing in from the northern barbarian mountains like a bucket of white paint, transforming the filthy Heason territory into a pristine expanse. In a dilapidated wooden hut on the outskirts of Heason territory, Richard wrapped himself tightly in his thin clothes, curling up in the straw to minimize heat loss. Hiss! It's so cold. Being a transmigrator, I'm really living a disgraceful life. A month ago, Richard came to this world due to a traffic accident and became the son of Old Richard, a peasant under the rule of the Baron of Heason. Old Richard was a real drunkard. Under the care of his drunken father, Richard's days were filled with starvation and beatings. Moreover, due to long-term malnutrition, Richard's frail body was incapable of fighting back. Fortunately, that drunkard was now dead. But the bad news was that the drunkard had exchanged all the valuable things in the house for inferior liquor, and Richard had finished the last grain of food at home a day ago. Cold and hungry, coupled with some injuries inflicted by a drunkard who froze to death in the snow 3 days ago, Richard huddled in the pile of straw, feeling like he was about to ascend to heaven at any moment. I can't sleep, absolutely cannot sleep. You are a transmigrator with a golden finger, how can you die in such a place? Richard forced his eyes open, continuously encouraging himself. Indeed, the transmigrated Richard actually did have a golden finger. When he transmigrated into this body of young Richard, he found a melter deep within his soul. But what this melter could do, Richard had always been unaware. However, no matter what its function was, at this time it gave Richard a glimmer of hope. To a person about to drown, a straw was a life-saving glimmer of dawn. Thump, thump, thump. In a daze, Richard thought he heard someone knocking on the door. Who would visit on such a cold day? Bang! When there was no response, the person outside kicked the door open. Old Richard, are you still alive? Richard's consciousness snapped awake, and he struggled from the straw, standing up. He recognized the voice. The visitor was the steward of the territory, Mr. Ellison from Heason territory. Steward sir, my father froze to death 2 days ago, but I am still alive. Whatever you need, just tell me. The steward was a big shot and he would definitely not visit a peasant's house without a good reason. This was an opportunity. Oh, so you are young Richard. Mr. Ellison frowned as he examined Richard, pulling a handkerchief out of his pocket to cover his nose. But Richard couldn't really blame him for that, considering his own situation was quite poor. With long hair that hadn't been groomed in a long while matted atop his head, a dirty face, clothes covered in filth, and wounds that remained untreated and were turning black, rotting. Compared to Richard, even a homeless person looked handsome, clean, and tidy. I am young Richard, steward sir. Richard supported his frail body and made a half bow. Rumor had it that Mr. Ellison was a person who greatly valued manners, even if facing the most witless rural farmer, he would insist on correct etiquette. Now Richard hoped this rumor was true. Observing Richard's bow, a trace of surprise flashed in the steward's eyes. Accustomed to the disrespect of the lower classes, although he often corrected their manners, he had become desensitized to these etiquette issues. Commoners naturally had trouble remembering noble etiquette. However, the child before him still performed the courtesy while close to freezing to death, which undoubtedly touched him. Even in death, nobles should not lose their manners, and he saw a hint of noble spirit in Richard. Good boy, good that you're alive. Come with me, and do whatever I need you to do, Mr. Ellison said gently. Yes, sir. Walking out of the wooden hut, the dense clouds covered the entire sky, like curtains blocking the sun, the poorest source of warmth for the poor. A gust of cold wind blew, causing Richard to shiver uncontrollably. Richard was clad only in his thin clothes, which were practically as good as none in the face of this chilling wind. Damn it, guard! Take off your coat. Hurry! Seeing Richard's condition, Mr. Ellison frowned, then turned and ordered the soldier following him to take off his coat. The commanded soldier's face stiffened. It seemed unreasonable to him to give his warm clothes to a foul-smelling commoner in such cold weather. Sir, if one is missing, then it's just missing, the territory is so large, and who knows how many children the wizard has. The ordered soldier muttered. Shut up! Don't try to guess the wizard's wisdom with your little smarts. Hearing the mention of the wizard, Mr. Ellison immediately changed his expression and sharply rebuked the soldier. If I hear you say such things again, be prepared to be hanged. Take off your clothes now and give them to this child. But unintentionally said words might be deliberately heard. Richard, standing aside, felt a jolt in his heart as he heard the mention of the wizard. Wizard! This world had magic. When Richard had arrived in this world, he had asked about transcendent powers, but unfortunately, the Heeson territory was remote, and his identity was lowly, garnering him nothing but folk spook stories after all his inquiries. But now, it seemed that transcendent powers indeed existed in this world. Once Richard donned the cotton coat warmed by the soldier's body, he felt considerably more comfortable. The lack of restraint in the soldier's speech caused the officer to lose his good mood obtained from Richard. His face darkened as he shouted at Richard. Put on your clothes and get moving. The wizard is growing impatient, and we're all going to die. Following the officer onto a carriage, Richard soon arrived at the barren castle located in the center of the territory. The castle hall was dimly lit, with torches mounted on the walls and a central hearth providing the only illumination. In the middle of the hall, children of all statuses, both rich and poor, gathered together, quietly waiting for the wizard deep within the hall to speak. Wizard, Baron, all children from 12 to 15 years in the territory are here. The officer reported to the depths of the hall, where a figure in a black robe and a triangular hat slowly stood up. He. There seemed to be fewer children in Heeson territory, Delis. Beside him, Richard saw the corpulent Baron Heeson wiping sweat from his forehead with a servile look. Yes, my lord, the harvests have been poor the last 2 years, indeed a lot of the commoners have starved. This will not do, the wizard patted Baron Heeson, causing him to shudder. The academy needs school-age children, and if I can't gather enough children, the academy will punish me. But I do not wish to be punished. So if I come to Heeson territory next time and you have prepared so few children, you'll be waiting to become a maggot eating shit in a toilet for the rest of your life. The wizard's tone grew heavier with each word, and by the end, his almost beast-like roar silenced the entire hall. Good, the wizard turned to look at the children in the hall has quieted down. Now, line up one by one, come before me for testing. Do not make me repeat myself. Upon hearing the wizard's words, the children in the hall immediately formed a long line. They might not know how powerful the wizard was, but after seeing Baron Heeson's pale face not even disguised with powder, every child knew what to do next. Richard stood in the middle of the group of children, positioned perfectly at the bend of the line, giving him a clear view of the wizard in the depths of the hall. Richard saw the wizard pull a crystal ball from beneath his robe, then beckoned a child to place their hand upon it. The crystal ball glowed faintly, and the wizard announced the test results. Spiritual power 9 points, not qualified, next. Spiritual power 8 points, not qualified. Spiritual power 7 points, not qualified. Spiritual power 10 points, barely passing. Stand behind me. Spiritual power 9 points, not qualified. The testing proceeded swiftly, and soon it was Richard's turn. Not qualified, next. The child before Richard stepped aside, and Richard, somewhat nervously, approached the wizard. After getting closer, Richard could finally see the face obscured by the triangular hat's shadow. Unexpectedly, the wizard's appearance wasn't fearsome white-streaked hair, a face full of wrinkles, and deep eye sockets with monocle perched on them. Overall, his appearance even looked somewhat kindly. But for some reason, Richard found his body involuntarily trembling as he stood before him. The sensation was like prey facing a predator. Place your hand on the crystal ball. Yes, wizard. Richard placed his hand on the crystal ball nervously and silently awaited his fate. Whether freeze to death in a broken house or follow the wizard, it all hinged on this moment. Light gradually emanated from the crystal ball, and a current-like force entered Richard's body from the ball, traveling through his arm. This force circulated through Richard's body for a full cycle before finally entering his brain. Simultaneously, it seemed as though a force had awakened a furnace deep within Richard's soul. A message transmitted from the furnace. Miracle furnace activated. At the same moment, the wizard in the black robe announced Richard's test result. Spiritual Power 15 points, Qualified. Chapter 2. Miracle Furnace, an object whose name alone commanded awe. Standing behind the wizard, Richard cautiously made mental contact with the furnace that had till now shown no reaction. He needed to figure out what this thing was for, and quickly. Fortunately, the process was not complicated. The moment Richard's mind touched the furnace, the functionality of the miracle furnace automatically transferred into his brain. In simple terms, the miracle furnace could extract from the raw materials anything that the host could utilize, whether it was some substance from the materials themselves or some information contained within them. When refining with the miracle furnace, the host needed to continuously provide fuel, and the amount of fuel consumed varied depending on what was being extracted. Extracting information required spiritual power, while extracting material required energy. The test proceeded swiftly. In less than an hour, over 100 children had been tested, but only 7 had passed the spiritual power test. All right. Let these children go back, the wizard in the black robe ordered the officer after the last child was tested. Yes, wizard sir, the officer bowed. Watching the other children leave one after the other, the remaining 7 looked at each other in bewilderment. Among these 7 children, there were a farmer's son, a baker's daughter, a blacksmith's adopted child, a merchant's youngest son. They almost encompassed all the classes of the entire territory, but now they stood together, awaiting the proclamation of the wizard in the black robe. All right, children. As the qualified ones, you are far superior to the others. You all will now become the 432nd batch of wizard apprentices of the Black Tower Wizard Academy, embarking on the path to seek truth at the academy. The wizard sounded very pleased, apparently satisfied with the 7 qualified children from the Hesan territory. He beckoned with his hand, signaling Baron Dellis to come over. Dellis, take these children for a bath and get them changed into fresh clothes. And this child, the wizard pointed at Richard, tend to his wounds. Should he encounter any issues on our journey due to his injuries, The wizard didn't complete his sentence, but the threat in his words was clear to all. I understand, sir, Baron replied with definitive resolve. With that, Baron Dellis arranged for the castle's attendants to lead the other children to the lower levels of the castle. There was a large bathhouse on the lower level of the castle, where a hot spring from beneath the ground had been ingeniously converted into bathing pools by Baron Hesan. In the bath, Richard's wounds shifted from numbness to pain. A hot water bath, such a luxurious thing was almost criminal for commoners, for the wood used to heat it could make so many meals. Let alone a natural hot spring, a luxury only nobles could afford. After staying in the water for a while and scrubbing off the mud and dust, Richard quickly got out. He had less time than the others, he needed to tend to his wounds. After leaving the bathhouse, Richard put on the new clothes prepared by the maid. Made of cotton, they were a bit large but comfortably warm. Standing in front of the mirror, Richard carefully examined his appearance. With shoulder-length black hair, deep-set eyes, a prominent nose, and a thin, pale-lipped mouth, he looked less like a commoner and more like a noble in distress. Sir, you must have noble blood in you, the maid beside him commented with admiration. Do I? Richard raised an eyebrow and then followed the maid to the second floor of the castle. The castle's second-floor corridor was lined with portraits, likely of previous Hesan barons. At the end, Richard saw the portrait of the first Baron Hesan, depicted in armor, holding a two-handed greatsword. Beside the portrait, a broken greatsword hung on the wall. As Richard laid eyes on the broken sword, his miracle furnace pulsed within him. Is this the first Hesan baron's sword? Richard felt stirred. The broken sword was recognized as raw material by the furnace. Yes, sir, the maid responded. Richard stepped forward and gently touched the broken sword. Raw material, the Count of Hesan's broken sword. Skill extractable, Wind Crow swordsmanship. Extraction cost, 5 spiritual power. Proceed with extraction. Wind Crow swordsmanship. Richard's heart quivered. That was the famous sword technique that the Count of Hesan had used to claim victory on the battlefields of old. The fame of this sword technique was such that even Richard, a lowly peasant, had heard wandering bards speak of it. But it was said that the technique had been lost 300 years ago. This was also the reason for the decline of the Hesan lineage. Faced with such a treasure, Richard naturally didn't hesitate to choose to extract it. This was an opportunity not to be missed. As soon as Richard chose to extract it, he instantly felt tired, as if he had been attending a morning's worth of advanced mathematics classes, his head heavy and groggy. But before Richard could succumb to drowsiness, the scene before him jolted him fully awake. The broken sword had vanished. Standing by, the maid was suddenly startled. Where had the large sword gone? But in the blink of an eye, the maid saw the broken sword reappear. Was she seeing things? The maid rubbed her eyes, assuring herself that the broken sword was still in its original place, while the young wizard looked at her quizzically. What's wrong? Nothing, sir, let's hurry to the doctor, the maid quickly said. Seeing that he had fooled her, Richard breathed a sigh of relief internally. He had not expected that the miracle furnace needed to consume the physical form as well in order to absorb the information. The moment he saw the broken sword disappear, Richard's heart skipped a beat. Fortunately, the miracle furnace completed the refinement in an instant, and the broken sword had only disappeared for a moment before returning to its original place. His gaze returned to the melter. Above the miracle furnace, a white light was undulating. When Richard touched the ball of light with his spiritual power, fleeting memories like flashing lights passed through his mind. He found himself on one dangerous battlefield after another, swinging the sword in his hand to slay one enemy after another. Sir? Sir? We're at the doctor's now. The maid's voice brought Richard back from his daze. His spiritual power was still too weak, and just accepting the battle memories left behind by past warriors could send him into a trance. Oh, sure. Richard came back to his senses and quickly entered the doctor's room. Half an hour later, Richard, leaning on the wall, walked out of the room weakly. Having undergone external injury surgery, the doctor did not have any anesthetic, only strong liquor to alleviate the pain. Fortunately, the doctor was quick with his hands, finishing the removal of the rotten flesh from the wound, stitching it up, and applying ointment in less than half an hour. It was at that time Baron Dellis also arrived on the second floor. Wizard apprentice, the wizard is ready to depart. Stepping outside the castle, Richard was now dressed in brand new cotton clothes. Though his face still showed some signs of malnourishment, his demeanor was completely different from before. You look good, the black-robed wizard said, looking at Richard with satisfaction and nodding his head. Then with a wave of his large sleeve, a mysterious force enveloped the seven of them, then floated beside the wizard like bubbles. This is levitation skill, you'll be able to learn it at the academy too. After briefly explaining, the black-robed wizard shot a fireball into the sky. Bang! The fireball exploded. A beam of light pierced through the leaden clouds, shooting through the burst fireball straight down to the earth. What is that? Richard looked up at the sky. Through the thick clouds, a huge grey outline was becoming gradually clearer. What in the world is this? Richard's voice trembled, he could hardly believe what he was seeing in the sky. Before him, a flying airship stretching hundreds of meters long like a blue whale emerged from the clouds, and the beam that had pierced the clouds was the eye of this immense craft. For a moment, Richard vividly recalled a legend he had heard while seeking information on transcendence. The legend told that every 10 years, a giant beast of the clouds would come roaming from the northern barbarian mountains. Its shape was as large as a mountain, its gaze as dazzling as lightning. Now, the legend had shed its cover. The black-robed wizard spread his arms, carrying everyone towards the column of light to ascend the sky, as if saints flying to heaven in glory. Richard saw that the wizard's mouth was moving, and a grand voice filled with joy reached the ears of all the qualifiers. Fellow juniors, welcome aboard the Zeppelin-type magic airship. Chapter 3. Junior brothers and sisters. Richard looked at the black-robed wizard, his heart stirring with tumultuous waves. Was a wizard like this also an apprentice like them? But before he could ponder further, a hole appeared at the bottom of the floating airship. The black-robed wizard led them inside, and as soon as Richard landed, he heard a robust female voice. 7 apprentices. Taylor, you're quite lucky. Richard focused his gaze and saw a fierce woman as tall as 2 meters and built like a bear standing inside the cabin, holding a nearly 2-meter-long door panel-sized great sword, its blade engraved with dense, mysterious symbols, looking very fantastical. Beside her, Richard also noticed a black-robed skeleton with blue flames flickering in its eye sockets. Upon seeing all of them enter, the skeleton waved its hand and the hole in the bottom of the cabin closed automatically. 7 apprentices, you'll all have to treat me to a meal when we get back, nothing less than 100 magic stones will do. The black-robed wizard's tone, once brutal towards the nobles, was now filled with joyful banter as he joked with the other wizards inside the cabin. Go to hell, 50 magic stones, take it or leave it. The skeleton wizard came up to the apprentices with a crystal ball, starting to tally their names along with their spiritual power. After the count was done, the skeleton wizard seemed to perform magic as he pulled out bags one after another from under his cloak, each containing a quill pen, a bottle of ink, a roll of white paper, a number plate, and 3 books. Without explanation, without conversation, the skeleton wizard's actions were entirely different from the other 2 wizards who were chatting leisurely. He had abandoned the emotions of the living, embracing both tranquility and rationality with his body and soul. These are your entrance materials. Inside you'll find the introductory courses of the Wizard Academy, and the enrollment regulations. That number plate is your room number. Stay in your rooms unless necessary during the time the airship is flying. Seeing the skeleton wizard say nothing at all, the wizard tailor who had led them aboard felt he had to explain. Now hurry up and find your own rooms. A bit of rough housing is fine during the flight of the airship, but don't kill anyone. The passenger cabin of the airship had only one corridor with neatly arranged rooms on both sides, each room meant for 4 people. Richard counted, and if the airship had 50 rooms, it could, at full capacity, carry around 200 people if need be. 50 rooms, 200 people. The fantasy world really is fantastic, even an airship is so impressive. Following the corridor to the end, Richard opened the door to room number 225, which temporarily belonged to him. "Hey, friend, I'm Ali from Golden Banner." Upon entering, Richard saw a girl greeting him. The girl had light golden hair and pale blue eyes, and although her face had some freckles, they only added a youthful charm to her appearance. "Hey? Is this room allocated incorrectly?" Richard was a bit bewildered and turned to go back to ask the skeleton wizard. "Don't bother asking, friend, someone already did." Wizard Ison said there was no mistake. Richard stopped in his tracks. "Wizard Ison? Is that the one who looks like a skeleton?" Ali nodded. "Yes, him." He said the room numbers are completely random, and not to bother him for exchanges. Many people have been trying to swap rooms these past few days, annoying him to the point where he almost threw those apprentices off the ship. Hearing this, Richard massaged his temples with a bit of a headache. This was going to be troublesome. Living with a woman was always bound to have many inconveniences. But since the wizard had already said room exchanges weren't allowed, he would have to comply. "All right then." Richard sighed. "Nice to meet you, Ali. I'm Richard from Heason territory." In fact, Ali had lied. Room swapping on the airship was possible, just that the means of swapping rooms was somewhat rough. As long as you could convince someone to agree to switch rooms without causing a fatality, the recruiting wizards wouldn't intervene in your actions. During the days Ali had been aboard the airship, there had been several violent conflicts already. And these violent conflicts often accompanied a particular occurrence. That was rape. The wizards would not stop these crimes. In their eyes, it was just minor trouble. A wizard who bore a striking resemblance to an ape even watched with great interest. This only fueled the malevolent thoughts of some aboard the airship. Fortunately, for most of the time, the airship was in high-speed flight, during which nobody was allowed out of their rooms. This is what allowed Ali to avoid those beasts in this corner room. But Richard's arrival brought her danger. If those beasts knew there was still such tempting prey in a corner of the airship, the next time the airship slowed down, it would be Ali's day of suffering. Therefore, she had to prevent Richard from changing rooms. Moreover, Richard was good-looking, very handsome, and also very weak. Chronic malnutrition caused Richard's complexion to appear extremely frail, and even clothed, his thin figure seemed as if a gust of wind could blow him down. Ali was confident she could resist any assault from Richard. Time returned to the present, and after entering the room, Richard casually shut the door. The room was not large, just about 11 or 12 square meters, with a small compartment that was probably a restroom. The furnishings were simple: 2 bunk beds, a table about 2 meters long, a couple of chairs, and a magic light on the ceiling made up all the room's decorations. In the small room, there were now just the 2 of them, Richard and Ali. A young boy and a young girl at the ages when hearts begin to stir, confined to a small room. The young boy was clear-eyed and handsome, the young girl was petite and cute. Their eyes met, then immediately averted. It seems this scene should be somewhat ambiguous. Bullshit. Richard may look like a teenager, but inside, he's an adult. His XP is that of a gentle and intelligent big sister. I'll sleep on the top bunk, just let me know if you're changing clothes, so I can look away. After saying this indifferently, Richard turned and climbed up to the upper bunk without his shoes. Flirting with a young girl was far less important to him, he had more significant things to handle. Sitting on the top bunk, Richard opened each of the 3 books from the bag. He couldn't understand any of them. As a farmer, being able to write one's name was considered well educated. However, Richard was able to guess that one of the thicker books must be a dictionary. Material, Wizard Language Dictionary. Possible information extraction, Wizard Language. Extraction cost, 10 spiritual power. Extract. Richard put the dictionary into his pocket and then made a decision. Extract. In an instant, Richard felt as though his head had been struck by a sledgehammer, his vision going dark. After an unknown period, Richard woke from his deep slumber. The room was pitch dark, seemingly late into the night. Ugh, can't be so reckless next time with the extraction. Richard rubbed his head, thankful that this time he was on an airship, surrounded by safety. If he had been anywhere else, he would have been putting himself in grave danger. Entering the soul space, a floating white light had been waiting for quite some time above the miracle furnace. As he blended with the white light, Richard didn't experience the illusions that accompanied the wind crow sword skill. He simply felt as if he had memorized a lot of things. Richard tried it out and found that he had indeed learned wizard language, but it was more like he had memorized the dictionary. If Richard were to read wizard language, he would sound just like a beginner, with inaccurate intonation. It seems there's a big difference between skill and information. Absorbing information is more like having knowledge poured directly into the brain, where practical application still requires plenty of practice. On the other hand, with skills, there's no issue with the application, however, it's difficult to condense the skills into text. Gurgle. A tremendous hunger pulled Richard back from his thoughts. He had gone nearly 2 days without food. "Allie, Allie," Richard called out softly. You're awake." From the darkness below, Ollie's voice reached him, seeming as though she hadn't slept. "Allie, what time is it now?" "It's 4:32 in the morning." Hearing the time, Richard simply estimated the duration of his stupor. He had been unconscious for about 14 hours. "Did anyone bring food during this time?" "Your food is on the table. Come down and eat if you want." Richard sensed something off in Ollie's tone. Although he had just met her, it wasn't common for someone to be so awake at 4 in the morning. "Have you been awake all night?" Richard asked softly. "Yet. Missing home?" "A little." It seemed she was a girl not accustomed to being far from home. Gurgle. Richard wanted to comfort her a bit more, but the loud rumblings of his stomach convinced him to eat first. Turning out of the bed, his dinner was laid out on the room's table. 2 palm-sized pieces of black bread, some burnt beef, and a bowl of beet porridge. Although the meal couldn't compare to the Chinese food in Richard's memory, it was far better than the sawdust-blackened bread he ate in the Heesan territory. Phew, that's a bit better now. After eating, Richard sat back in his chair and breathed a sigh of relief. While the meal hadn't filled him up, at least there was something in his stomach. "Richard, are you a knight?" Allie was lying in her bed, looking at Richard from her side. Richard could sense something was amiss in her voice. Was Allie crying? "I'm not, why do you suddenly ask?" "Then we're doomed." Richard's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Richard," Ollie's voice was choked with sobs, "do you know what our entrance examination for the academy is, according to the handbook?" "What is it?" "It's killing." Chapter 4. Murder, Entrance Examination. These two seemingly unrelated terms put together made Richard feel that this world was truly wondrous. "Do I need to murder someone to pass an entrance examination? On which page did you see that?" Richard suspected this to be a prank. What kind of academy would want a bunch of murderers as students? Allie, sobbing, handed the enrollment rules to Richard. Just then, the magic light in the room happened to turn on, and Richard, who had already learned the wizard language, opened the dog-eared page of Ollie's book in the light. The page read as follows. Before entering the Wizard Academy, prospective wizard apprentices must undergo an entrance examination called the Life and Death Race, the details of which are as follows. At the start of the exam, each prospective wizard apprentice will receive a crystal ball and 7 nutritional potions that can substitute for a day's food. The wizard apprentices must reach a designated location set by the academy within 14 days, carrying at least 2 crystal balls. Those who do not have the required number of crystal balls, or fail to arrive on time within 14 days, will lose their qualification to enter. Note, the academy does not provide return services. If one loses the qualification to enroll, the apprentice must return to their place of origin on their own. Having read that, Richard tossed the enrollment rules back to Ali, climbed onto his bed, and pulled out his own copy of the rules, turning to the same page. The content was exactly the same. This was no joke. This is going to be somewhat troublesome. Richard closed the rules. He didn't know why the Academy did this, going through great lengths to bring them, these apprentices, to the Academy just to filter out half of them through an entrance examination. But he was clear about one thing, that concern was pointless now, he was already on the airship. So now he must find a method to pass the entrance examination as soon as possible. Among these prospective wizard apprentices, there were those from the lower peasant class as well as those from the higher class nobles. The commoners, much like Richard, were malnourished and slender of build. In contrast, those nobles possessed strong bodies, along with martial skills they had learned from a young age. Every noble is a knight, this saying was widely circulated in the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom and regarded as the foundation of the rule by the nobility. In the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom, a knight was not just a title, but a symbol of personal strength. Every knight was a muscular man who could move swiftly even when wearing plate armor and wielding a two-handed great sword in one hand. Moreover, in the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom, a noble's title had to be inherited by a knight. Hence, these noble offspring, even if morally questionable and not too bright, had bodies that, due to their training from an early age, were far superior to the common folk even if they slacked off. Competing with such a group, Richard and his fellow commoners had virtually no hope of survival. It's impossible, the Academy wouldn't recruit commoner students only to give them no chance at all to resist. Richard's mind was racing as he immediately took out the 3 books issued by the Academy. The Wizard Academy wouldn't specifically spend energy designing a test that a commoner couldn't pass, they must have left something behind that could bridge the gap between the students. Richard spread the 3 books out on his bed, one of them was a wizard language dictionary, another was the enrollment rules, and the last one had a more direct name called How to Become a Wizard Apprentice. Material: How to Become a Wizard Apprentice. Extractable information: Basic meditation method, magic rebound construction, basic magic rules. Extraction cost: 7 spiritual power. Extract. Extract. At one end of the flying airship, the exclusive resting cabin for wizards. Airly, how many of these apprentices do you think will survive this time? Taylor looked out at the sea of clouds through the window. The flying altitude of the airship was around 2,000 meters, at this height, it seemed as if the sea of clouds was the actual ground. Maybe over 4,000. This class cancelled the exchange of crystal balls for magic stones, so it's unlikely anyone will go out of their way to hunt others. The muscle-bound woman who had before held a door-sized greatsword, now leaning against the cabin wall, responded casually. I heard the Dean took a big loss in the plane wars and needs to replenish wizard numbers as much as possible. The students these last few terms are lucky indeed. Taylor's tone carried a hint of exclamation. He too had once been a tough character who fought his way through a crowd of apprentices. But after a failed promotion, he was doomed never to become a wizard. Now he could only work for the Academy to make ends meet. Looking at the current batch of prospective apprentices, Taylor, who was already over 100 years old, couldn't help but reminisce about his younger self. Speaking of which, why haven't I seen Malu around? Taylor asked. This group has a few quick-witted kids, they pooled together some magic stones to have him go over the meditation method. Oh. Taylor was somewhat surprised, isn't that against the rules? Airly shrugged, if you don't tell and I don't tell, how would those big shots at the Academy know? Moreover, those kids spent magic stones, which conforms to the principle of equivalent exchange. Even if the Academy found out, they would probably praise them for being smart. But Taylor shook his head. The textbooks written by the principal are simple enough. If they can't learn from materials of this level, even if they did get in, they would just be waiting to die. The path to truth must ultimately be walked by oneself. If they succeed by taking shortcuts now, can they take shortcuts for the rest of their life? Room 225. Richard sat cross-legged on the bed, striving to still his mind. After refining the knowledge from How to Become a Wizard Apprentice, Richard had fully mastered the theoretical knowledge of the meditation method. The meditation method is the cultivation technique of wizards. Its main purpose is to help wizards increase and recover their spiritual power. The 3 key elements to becoming a wizard apprentice are linking to the Sea of Souls, constructing a magic rebound, and engraving magic marks. And among these, the most difficult is linking to the Sea of Souls. Richard adjusted his state according to the information in the book. According to the book, the stronger one's spiritual power, the easier it is to connect to the Sea of Souls. As long as he connected to the Sea of Souls, his meditation would be half successful. As Richard's inner peace grew, he began engraving runes in his spiritual world. There are 3 runes in the basic meditation method, and when Richard finished engraving the runes, his spirit suddenly felt as if it had left his body and plunged into a bottomless abyss. Within the abyss, there was an eerie silence, time and space seemed non-existent. Richard's spirit didn't know how long it stayed in this abyss. Boredom, loneliness, and fear surged in his mind like a tide. But he endured it all. Because this was the necessary path to linking with the Sea of Souls. Finally, after an unknowable duration of falling, Richard's spirit at last touched the Sea of Souls. In an instant, Richard saw an endless astral sea. The Sea of Souls reflects the material world, and every plane in the material world is a star in the Sea of Souls. This magnificent sight has influenced every wizard who has seen it, and it is why wizards later referred to the material world as the star realm. As records from the book flashed in Richard's mind, at that moment, his thoughts seemed to overlap with those of countless wizards through the millennia. This is truly beautiful. With a sigh of admiration, Richard then began to leave his own mark in the Sea of Souls. With this mark, he would be able to connect to the Sea of Souls more easily. What kind of mark should I leave? Richard, gazing at the endless stars, suddenly felt a wave of solitude wash over him. Alone in an other world as a stranger, looking at the stars only deepens the longing for home. Using his spiritual power as a pen, Richard drew a 5-pointed star in the Sea of Souls. After all this, Richard's spirit began to feel somewhat faint. The basic meditation method only allowed him to stay in the Sea of Souls for this long. If he wanted to stay longer, he would need to find a more advanced meditation method. A few seconds later, his spirit returned to the material world. At this moment, he had completed the most difficult and important step of becoming a wizard apprentice. Chapter 5. Ali, what time is it now? 8 o'clock, breakfast will be soon. It was 8 o'clock, and Richard had started his meditation around 5 o'clock. This meant that although Richard felt he had only been in the Sea of Souls for a short while, he had actually meditated for 3 hours. It seems meditation distorts my sense of time. Richard thought to himself, as his stomach rumbled again. Richard, aren't you scared? Ollie's voice came from the lower bunk, her tone now steady. Scared? Richard was lying on his bed, curling up to alleviate his hunger, and his experiences over the past month began to replay in his mind. Each day of that month had been spent in fear, his frail body, meager food supplies, and temperamental drunkards around. Every morning Richard woke up hoping it was all just a dream. The current situation was countless times better than the previous month. I've been through worse, there's nothing to be scared of. The room fell silent. Before being chosen, Ali was a merchant's daughter, where survival pressure was like a cloud in the sky to her. Visible, but almost untouchable. She could hardly imagine what Richard had endured to stay so calm facing a skirmish. He was so frail a gust of wind could blow him over. So what do you plan to do? We can't beat those nobles. Ali remembered the knights she had seen, those armored monsters on the battlefield who, with just a few knight attendants, could break through armies of hundreds. She couldn't imagine how she would deal with such people. Ali, who do you think is stronger, a wizard apprentice or a knight? Of course. Ali instinctively wanted to answer wizard apprentice, for even as apprentices, wizards wielded wondrous magic that knights couldn't possibly withstand. But before she could speak, she thought of the book in her bag, How to Become a Wizard Apprentice. Blinded by fear, she had forgotten that the academy had already given them means to resist. Richard, you're a genius. Excited, Ali jumped out of bed, grabbed the wizard language dictionary and How to Become a Wizard Apprentice, and ran to the desk. Although she hadn't trained in combat like those nobles from childhood, she surpassed them in her reading. Richard ignored Ali's reaction, all he wanted was to hurry up and have breakfast. After a while, someone knocked on the door. Hearing this, Richard immediately rolled out of bed. Breakfast was here. Opening the door, Richard saw a puppet-like creature pushing a cart filled with neatly arranged breakfasts. Room 225, breakfast for 2. A strange, shrill voice emanated from the puppet's body. Richard took 2 plates into the room, then handed the previous night's plates to the puppet. The puppet took the plates and then shakily moved on to the next room. That's magic. Richard watched the puppet, a spark of excitement in his eyes. Inside the room, Ali was tirelessly translating with one hand on the dictionary and the other on the book. Ali, your breakfast. Keep it. Ali replied without lifting her head, now immersed in the sea of knowledge with no thought for food. Richard scratched his head, thinking it must be nice to be young, full of energy even without eating. But then, his body wasn't much older than Ali's at the moment. Richard sat cross-legged on the bed, his eyes tightly closed. In this moment, his spiritual power was replacing his eyes to observe the world. This was his 7th day linked to the Sea of Souls. Over these 7 days, the airship had been stable. Richard, following the process outlined in the book, methodically built his magic rebound. Although this process wasn't as swift as linking to the Sea of Souls, it was almost effortless. During these 7 days, Ali, who shared a room with Richard, was immersed in translating how to become a wizard apprentice. Her dedication was so profound that it even surprised Richard. Indeed, in life-threatening crises, everyone can unleash their inner potential. Linking to the Sea of Souls liberated the spiritual power from the souls of wizard apprentices, allowing them to sense the magic power that floated freely in the world by means of their spiritual power. In Richard's perception, the magic power drifting between heaven and earth appeared like fireflies, flickering with bright yet faint light. Richard's spiritual power transformed into tendrils, which attracted every point of magic power they touched. Then the tendrils withdrew, and all the points of magic power were absorbed into Richard's body. If linking to the Sea of Souls was the foundation for becoming a wizard apprentice, building the magic rebound was like building the walls and roof. Wizards needed spiritual power to manipulate magic power, and using spiritual power to temporarily control the magic power freely available in the world was not only time-consuming and strenuous, but also very inefficient. However, the magic rebound stored magic power in advance within a wizard's body and stabilized it with spiritual power so that the wizard didn't need to rely on the external world's magic power at critical moments. Yet, the magic power stored in the magic rebound wasn't infinite. A wizard's capacity depended on his limit of spiritual power. If a spell required more magic power than the magic rebound's limit, a wizard had no choice but to revert to the basics or find another solution. With the entry of the last magic power point, the long-accumulated magic power inside Richard finally triggered a qualitative change and transformed into a stream that started at his heart, flowed through his organs, and returned to his heart, forming a complete circulation. I did it. Richard opened his eyes, his face brimming with excitement. The construction of the magic rebound meant he could now quickly unleash the zero-ring spells recorded in the book. Zero-ring spells referred to those lower-level spells that didn't need the establishment of magic marks in the soul and could be used directly. Some wizards didn't even consider them true magic, just techniques of magic power application. At the end of How to Become a Wizard Apprentice, the author considerately prepared 4 zero-ring spells for apprentices who had completed the magic rebound. These were Magic Missile, Force Field Barrier, Light Body Skill, and Silence Technique. These 4 zero-ring spells covered offense, defense, escape, and stealth, making them extremely versatile. And now, Richard was no longer powerless. While Richard was reveling in joy, Ali, who had been tirelessly translating these past days, suddenly slammed the dictionary down. Tired of translating again? Richard thought. Haha, Richard, come down and see. I've finished translating. Ali stood up and stretched, her body making cracking sounds. After 7 days of relentless work, she had finally finished translating How to Become a Wizard Apprentice. In the process, she had also nearly mastered the wizard language. Congratulations, congratulations. It looks like you've practically passed the exam already. Richard rolled out of bed and congratulated her with a bow. Hee hee. Ali walked over to Richard and gave him a solid pat on the back. Over these days, Ali and Richard had become much closer. Richard knew that Ali was the cherished daughter of a wealthy merchant. Ali knew that Richard was a farmer with a deceased alcoholic father. Their attitudes toward the future were vastly different. Richard's calm and longing for the future fascinated Ali. Whenever she thought of giving up, Richard always managed to dissuade her with a few words. Now it was her turn to repay the favor. In the next few days, learn some wizard language with me, so you can also become a wizard apprentice. Richard was taken aback, but then he felt a warmth in his heart. Don't worry, wizard language is easy to learn. Many of its words are very similar to our own. If you study diligently, you can understand how to become a wizard apprentice during this period. Ali. Richard cut her off, his expression a mix of amusement and seriousness. Have you ever considered that if I become a wizard apprentice, you'll have one more competitor in the exams? One more competitor means more danger. Aren't you afraid I might stab you in the back? Richard's voice was calm, but his words made Ali a bit fearful. More wizard apprentices meant more competitors in this deadly exam. Every competitor was a lethal threat. Was she really going to teach Richard? Well. Ali's voice grew from soft to firm, as if she had found a flaw in Richard's words. Richard, you wouldn't do that. If you were, you wouldn't be telling me about it now. Richard stroked his chin. Generally speaking, I wouldn't stab someone in the back. But there's always that one chance. But besides that one chance, there are also 9,999 out of 10,000 where I wouldn't. Ali then suddenly punched Richard hard with her left hand. You're such a strange person. I'm trying to help you, and you're still making excuses. If you keep this up, watch out, I might really stop teaching you. Chapter 6. After the conversation, Richard and Ali grew much closer. After that, Richard would practice wizard language with Ali during the day and meditate at night. Although Richard had memorized wizard language due to refining, he still needed practice to apply it efficiently. In this way, the time had come to the 15th day of Richard entering the flying airship. The flying airship occasionally decelerated during flight, and the wizards on board would take this time to inspect and maintain the airship. During this time, the apprentices on the flying airship could move freely. Richard. I connected to the Sea of Souls last night. Early in the morning, Ali excitedly shared her progress, patting Richard's bed. Ali's talent was not considered good, her spiritual power only being 12 points. What Richard had managed in a short while took her 7 full days to complete. But this was still worthy of praise. According to the books, many preparatory apprentices needed meditation incense and magic potion to aid their first connection to the Sea of Souls. Ali's achievement of connecting in 7 days was considered average at the academy. Whereas apprentices like Richard, who connected on their first meditation, were rated excellent at the academy. Above him was another level, those born connected to the Sea of Souls, inherently having a spiritual power of 20 points, born wizard apprentices. However, such apprentices were few and far between in the history of the academy, most often appearing among the wizard descendants. Congratulations, congratulations! Big Sister Ali has finally become a wizard apprentice. Richard, yawning, sat up on his bed and rubbed his eyes to express his congratulations. It looks like I'll have to rely on Big Sister Ali for this exam. Hearing this, Ali was exceedingly proud. Don't worry, Big Sister has got you covered for this exam. Knock, knock, knock. There was a knock on the door, and when Ali opened it, for some reason, the puppet that delivered breakfast had come earlier today. Room 225, breakfast for 2. Today the airship is undergoing maintenance, and the apprentices may move freely. The puppet's voice remained odd, but the message it brought made Ali's smile vanish abruptly. Free movement? Ali asked. The puppet didn't respond and mechanically pushed its cart to the next room. Ali closed the door, her face turning quite grim as if she were about to cry. It's over, it's over, it's over. I just connected to the Sea of Souls, and my magic rebound hasn't been established yet, this. Ali paced anxiously around the room, and Richard was curious about her reaction. Isn't free movement a good thing? After being in the room for so many days, don't you want to go out for a walk? He had been on the airship for half a month now, staying in one room the whole time, feeling as if his joints were going to rust. You don't understand, if we can move freely, those bastards will be able to come out. Ali's expression looked like she was about to cry, frantically telling Richard about the events on the airship before he had boarded. So that's it. Richard, stroking his chin, looked somewhat intrigued. Did he really appear this week when he boarded the airship? You better stay in your room then. I'll go out for a walk. Richard swung out of bed and quickly finished his breakfast. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion, but he felt a lot stronger after connecting to the Sea of Souls. His thin body, long malnourished, seemed to have gained some muscles. Could it be that the wizard's food contained supplements? Hey! I've been teaching you wizard language these days, can't you help out and not go out? Seeing Richard about to leave, Ali looked like a cat whose fur had been ruffled. Richard casually waved his hand. Don't worry, I'm not going out there shouting about having a beautiful female roommate. You stay quiet, and those bastards can't just barge in, can they? The space on the airship was not small. Besides the cabins where they lived, the rear end of the airship had an observation deck spanning dozens of square meters. This cabin was usually reserved for wizards, but since the airship was undergoing maintenance today, apprentices could also enter to enjoy the scenery. Richard stood by the window, staring at the boundless sea of clouds, feeling exhilarated. The walls of the observation cabin, made of a glass-like material, allowed an unobstructed view of the clouds outside the airship. Soon, the observation cabin was full of apprentices, some nobles, and some commoners, each forming their own circles. Though no one was forcibly separated, the distinction between the groups was clear. Except for Richard. Beside Richard, a group of nobles secretly exchanged their private information. To prevent the commoners from eavesdropping, they even spoke in wizard language. "Are you sure, Emily? Did your brother really connect to the Sea of Souls?" a blonde noble asked. "Of course, would my brother lie to me?" Across from the blonde noble, a girl with the same hair color and a face full of freckles retorted with spirit. Emily's words caused a stir among the nobles, all of whom were studying how to become a wizard apprentice, but very few had actually succeeded. For the vast majority, without the aid of meditation, incense and magic potions, connecting to the Sea of Souls was as difficult as climbing to heaven. Speaking of which, didn't the Medici hire a wizard to teach them? How are they doing? That's 10 magic stones. 10 magic stones. Some nobles, unaware of the news, were shocked. The Medici family really is wealthy. Those magic stones, if converted to gold coins, would probably be worth 100,000 gold coins. The kingdom's annual tax revenue is only 500,000 gold coins. The Medici family is truly as rich as a nation. But I heard they didn't make it. Although the wizard taught them, there was no meditation incense or magic potion on the flying airship. Without those aids, they are just like us. That's just wonderful. Someone said, delighting in the misfortune of others. The gap between a knight and a wizard apprentice is no less than that between the unarmed and the armed. Having one less wizard apprentice is like having one less predator, which is great news. Richard listened on the side, pretending not to understand anything. These arrogant nobles believed that people like him, the lowly ones, couldn't possibly understand wizard language and spoke without any restraint. This was a delight for Richard to overhear. But just then, a scream echoed from a nearby cabin. "Tisk tisk, the Black Bear gang is at it again," a noble clicked his tongue. "The pretty lowborns on board have probably all been toyed with by now," another noble joined in. "These lowborns are really beasts, can't even keep it in their pants." The freckled girl named Emily covered her nose and mouth as if she could smell the foul stench of the Black Bear gang members. Nevertheless, despite all the talk, none of the nobles moved to act, to administer some justice. Dog eats dog among the lowborns, what does it have to do with them, the nobles? Ah! The woman's scream came again, but this time the voice sounded eerily familiar. Richard realized something was wrong and quickly left the viewing cabin. That seemed to be Ollie's voice. The viewing cabin was not far from room 225, so as soon as he exited, Richard saw a man with a muscular body and a scar on his face banging on room 225's door. Beside him were a few loafers cheering him on, who, although not as strong as the scar-faced man, were considered burly among the commoners. "Woman, you better open up quickly. Or else you'll have it coming. Yeah, this time we might be gentle, but once the boss breaks down the door, you'll be struggling to close your legs." The loafers yelled loudly outside the door, while inside, Ali desperately blocked the door with a table. The rooms on the flying airship had only a simple latch, and without blocking the door, a strong man could break in with just a couple of hits. "Ali, you fool, what were you thinking looking outside?" Ali gritted her teeth as she blocked the door, berating herself. Shortly after Richard left, Ali couldn't bear staying inside any longer. Being young, who would want to stay locked in a room? So she opened the door slightly to peek outside, thinking to quickly check the viewing cabin if no one was around. But as soon as she opened the door, she encountered the members of the Black Bear gang looking for women to vent their desire. The Black Bear gang members, desperate for a woman, saw such a beauty peering out from her room and instinctively reacted, rushing towards Ali. This led to the scene just witnessed. Crack! Along with the sound of wood breaking, the latch of room 225 was completely knocked open. "It's over." Ollie's heart sank with the sound. Without a latch, she couldn't possibly hold those men back. But oddly, after a while, she didn't hear anyone enter. Instead, she heard several screams and groans of pain. Could it be that a wizard had intervened? Ali stepped out from behind the table and peered through the crack of the door. She saw members of the Black Bear gang lying on the floor, while a thin figure was stepping on the face of the Black Bear gang's leader. All the while cursing. Fucking fag, banging on my door, harassing my roommate and daring to hit on me. Chapter 7. Time rewound to moments before the cap was smashed. Richard stepped out of the observation cabin and immediately spotted the leader of the Black Bear gang who was pounding at the door. This leader, named Riley, had been a gang lord's son in Zijing territory of the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom before he was selected as a prospective apprentice. From a young age, Riley possessed a strong physique, which gave him a natural advantage, allowing him to become a knight attendant at just 12 and graze the edge of knighthood by 15. Had he continued training, in less than 5 years, Riley would have become a knight. And with another decade or so of rigorous discipline, it was very likely that he would rise to the rank of a senior knight in his 30s. A senior knight of such a young age would certainly be a prodigy even in the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom. By then, the king would bestow a title upon him, and nobles would wear out the carpets in Riley's home seeking alliances through marriage. However, Riley was chosen. A wizard's will could not be denied. It mattered not whether Riley was a gang lord's son, or even a crown prince, he would dutifully become a wizard apprentice. Riley's father lamented this fate, but Riley himself felt differently. When he witnessed the king and the assembly of nobles bowing their heads to wizards during the testing ceremony, a flame was lit within him. A flame named ambition. He aspired to become a wizard, to wield that transcendent power. Once aboard the airship, Riley quickly realized that as the son of a gang lord, the wizards did not care what he did, as long as the apprentice survived until the examination. Having realized this, he quickly subdued a gang of followers and began his ruthless rule. Anything he eyed would end up in his hands, anyone he desired would end up in his bed. Many nobles detested his actions, yet none stepped forward to stop him. Besides the fact that Riley didn't provoke the nobles, the most significant reason was that he was a knight attendant. No noble would cause a conflict with a knight attendant over common folk. Bang! Bang! Riley was sneering as he slammed against the door. Inside was a woman he had not yet seen, who he presumed to be a virgin. The thought of breaking down the door and indulging in such a delectable treat made his blood boil with excitement. But as he continued his assault, a shadow flickered at the corner of his vision. The person looked somewhat frail and wasn't tall, beneath black hair was a face handsome yet with a tinge of weakness. Gurgle. Ridley suddenly stopped banging. "You lot, take over," he ordered, turning to some of his lackeys. Richard watched as Riley abruptly stopped, feeling an inexplicable chill in his heart. It seemed as though something vile was about to happen. "Little beauty, were you in the last group to board?" Riley's eyes lecherously scrutinized Richard, his blood-red tongue subconsciously licking his lips. He was not only lecherous but also indiscriminate in his sexual desires. And Richard was just to his taste. Richard looked back, seeing no one else. It seemed the comment was indeed about him. There was nothing more to say. Richard turned around woodenly, his expression dark and dismal. A surge of rage mixed with disgust rose in his heart. "Die!" Richard lifted his hand indifferently as magic power gathered at his fingertips, turning into a pale blue light that shot out like a meteor, striking Riley in the chest. Zero-ring spell, magic missile. In an instant, Riley felt as if he had been smacked in the chest by a knight wielding a warhammer, his body flying backward in an agonizing and fierce expression. "Wizard! Wizard!" The lackeys, terrified by this spectacle, hastily retreated, but Richard was not about to let them off. "You're no different." Richard's face was cold as streaks of pale blue light flew from his fingertips, precisely hitting the lackeys. These lackeys, being weaker than Riley, naturally couldn't dodge the missiles, they dropped to the ground, wailing in pain. Fortunately, Richard wasn't blinded by rage the missiles aimed at the lackey's legs. As long as there were no deaths, all could be made right. Richard advanced slowly, the blue glow at his fingertips flickering in and out. In that moment, Richard seemed like a hell judge walking among mortals, about to use those pale blue missiles to judge the sins of the world. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. Finally, Ridley, who had been flung backwards, stopped pretending to be dead and started crawling and rolling toward the other end of the airship. "Wizard! Lord Wizard! Someone is trying to..." His words were cut short as a magic missile landed between his legs. In that moment, it was as if the sound of an egg cracking echoed in the air. Under such intense pain, Ridley's eyes rolled back, and he instantly passed out. But Richard was still not satisfied, the disgusting feeling, as if he had swallowed a fly, persisted in his mind. So, he quickly walked over and stomped viciously on Ridley's feet with his shoe. Damn faggot, crashing into my door, bullying my roommate, and even daring to come after me. Richard. Richard turned around, only to see Ali staring at him blankly. Oh, Ali, are you okay? Richard greeted her casually, then rubbed the blood off the bottom of his shoe on Ridley's body. Did you do all of this? Ali looked at everything in front of her. The devilish Ridley had actually been defeated. And it was all done by the Richard who had been with her these past few days. A sense of absurdity overwhelmed Ali, making her feel like she was in a dream. When had he set up the magic rebound? The wizard who was supposed to be inspecting the airship arrived late, and at the same time, the nobles in the viewing cabin, attracted by the screams of the Black Bear gangsters, came out to watch the commotion. My God, that commoner actually defeated Ridley. Ridley is a knight attendant, even among us, he's considered a formidable figure. Does that commoner have magic tools? But without a magic stone, magic tools can't be used, right? Could it be that he has established magic rebound, becoming an official wizard apprentice? How is that possible? How could a commoner do it so quickly? The noble's private whispers reached Richard's ears. Apart from the demeaning and shock, the use of magic stones to activate magic tools instantly caught Richard's attention. Magic tools? Richard made a mental note of this key piece of information which could be crucial for his entrance exam. He had to handle it carefully. Before long, a wizard appeared from the other end of the airship and arrived late at the scene. She was a witch, who looked to be about 30 years old, with quite ordinary looks and no apparent mutations, except that the palms of both her hands grew a mouthful of sharp teeth. After a brief inspection, the witch threw a few people onto the spot and walked straight up to Richard. I am Billiana, who did this? Ali, standing beside, immediately wanted to speak up for Richard. Lord Wizard, it was these people who tried to break into the room, so. But her words were cut off by Richard. Lord Wizard, I don't know who did this. When I got here, they were already lying here. Richard spoke to Billiana with a calm composure, as if these injured people had nothing to do with him. Billiana gave him a deep look, a slight smile forming at the corner of her mouth. Very well, it seems a kind ghost has taken the liberty to tidy up these little brats for me. Though it was a bit heavy-handed, if caught, I guess there will be a penalty. With that, Billiana patted Richard and used the levitation skill to move the bodies off the ground and away from the scene. Ali stood by, shocked at everything she witnessed. Richard, how could you dare? Ali clutched at her chest, she could feel her heart pounding. Deceiving a wizard was such a brazen act, and Richard had not only done it but done it so clumsily. But why did the wizard believe him? Ali's mind was in turmoil until Richard pulled her back into the room, bringing her back to her senses. Richard, what was that all about just now? Richard sat on the stool, a glint of wisdom flashing in his eyes. Ali, these are the rules of the game for wizards. On this airship, the rules of the wizards represent an insurmountable red line for us, but for the wizards, those might just be rules set on a whim during a meal. Although I breached the rules, the inspecting wizard, Billiana, thought I did well. She didn't want to punish me. That's why she asked that question. Ali muttered in disbelief, who did all this? She could hardly fail to see who did it, yet if the rules are mere scraps of paper to her, why would she even ask? Richard smiled, a flash of self-mockery passing over his face. Because there isn't just one wizard on the airship, she needed an excuse for the other wizards. Even if that excuse is ridiculous. To the wizards, an injured apprentice only deserves a ridiculous excuse. Chapter 8. The Black Bear gang's encounter quickly spread throughout the entire airship. After hearing this news, the apprentices discussed it animatedly, mostly pleased that Ridley had been dealt with. The girls who had been harassed by Ridley cheered even louder upon hearing the news. But all of this was irrelevant to Richard. At that moment, Richard was sitting in room 225, recovering his magic power while leisurely observing the several nobles before him. Would you gentlemen care to introduce yourselves? Richard sat on a stool with Ali nervously standing beside him. Although Richard did not know the nobles due to his lowly status, Ali was well acquainted with them. The nobles before him were the offspring of the major families of the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom. Ordinarily, even Ali's father would have to pay a hefty sum for an audience with them. I'll go first. A tall, handsome blonde man took a seat opposite Richard. I am Kevin Medici. I have come to invite you, Richard, to join our alliance. The Medici family. Ali exclaimed. The Medici family was one of the most prominent noble families in the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom, with direct dominion and vassal territories amounting to a quarter of the kingdom's land. Among the people, the Medici family's history of rising from small traders to great nobility was admired and aspired to by countless merchants. Richard, with his chin propped on his hand, said calmly, "It seems we have a big shot here. The Medici family might be influential, but only within the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom. On this airship, there were no distinctions between high and low, only the strong and the weak, life and death. Pass the test and you live, fail it and you die." Kevin was not surprised by Ollie's reaction, but Richard's indifference did startle him. From Richard's response, it seemed that his noble identity, along with his illustrious family, mattered little. This gave Kevin a bit of a headache, but at the same time, he couldn't help but admire Richard more. Not everyone could swiftly change the perspective they had held for over a decade. Those who could so easily become wizard apprentices truly possessed something extraordinary. After a moment of thought, Kevin decided to play the weaker role. But compared to wizards, the Medici family is nothing more than a group of mortals with a bit of strength. Richard smiled. It seemed that young Master Kevin was a sensible man. "So, Master Kevin, what is the strength of your organization? What position could I hold within it? What benefits could I obtain?" Richard was not interested in verbal sparring with nobles. His questions went straight to the heart of the collaboration. This left Kevin, accustomed to noble negotiations, momentarily at a loss for how to answer. "Well..." Kevin hemmed and hawed, his brain spinning rapidly trying to articulate a structured response. But his hesitation was enough for someone else to answer for him. "Scum! Richard, I think you should take a longer view." A red-haired noble from behind Kevin suddenly spoke up. This red-haired noble was corpulent with a greasy face. Although he tried to sound conciliatory, he could not hide the stench of his noble arrogance. He looked down on Richard from the bottom of his heart. "Joining us would be an opportunity for you. Our organization consists of nobles," said the fat, red-haired man with pride. "As long as you join us, you too can be part of that nobility." As soon as the fat man spoke, Kevin knew the situation had taken a turn for the worse. A man who cared not even for the prestigious Medici family, would he care for that obsolete noble status? Offer him the position of a duke and he would surely reject it without hesitation. Sure enough, Richard erupted in laughter at the fat man's words. "Ha ha ha ha, Kevin, did you hear that? What a rich offer your lackey is making me." Richard's sarcastic gaze swept over the group of nobles behind Kevin. Although they tried to appear amiable, their disdain for him was palpable. In contrast, Kevin, of high pedigree, genuinely set his status aside and sought to recruit him. "I must say this, I come from the great Birmingham family, and the Medici family doesn't warrant me to be a follower of Kevin." The red-haired hefty man's demeanor turned serious as he explained, as if it were a matter of great importance. He couldn't understand Richard's laughter becoming a noble, an opportunity countless in the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom would pay for and never find. Here this lowly commoner received such a grace and yet felt no gratitude, instead mocking him with laughter. This was utterly illogical. A commoner was always a commoner, even if one miraculously became a wizard, that dull mind couldn't comprehend profound matters. Kevin took a deep breath. He feared not a divine opponent but dreaded a swinish ally. The fat man's words had almost rendered this recruitment pointless, but Kevin still wanted to salvage the situation. Richard, as wizard apprentice, would not only add considerable strength to their alliance but also reduce a threat. "I swear on my family name. Bully, if you speak one more word, even a single letter, I will kick you out." Kevin's voice trembled with uncontainable fury, his blunt words inflating Bully's face with rage. He opened his mouth as if to speak further, but upon seeing Kevin's icy glare, he ultimately closed it. "Richard, you don't need to mind Bully's words. He's a new noble, and thus prideful about his status. Not all members of our organization are like that." Kevin turned back to Richard, his face instantly wearing a proper smile. "In our alliance, we have 1 knight, 2 apprentice wizards about to connect with the Sea of Souls, and 5 knight attendants. Although I don't know the situation with other airships, I can say that the strength of our alliance is definitely sufficient to pass this exam. And in our alliance, we also have a descendant of a legendary knight." Saying this, Kevin leaned in close to Richard with a mysterious air. "Richard, have you heard of that legend? The legendary knights who founded the 7 great kingdoms came from the realm of the gods, and their descendants carry the blood of gods." Kevin's words piqued Richard's interest. He had indeed heard the legends of the legendary knights, how in ancient times, 7 knights came from the realm of the gods to the human world and founded what are now the 7 great kingdoms amidst a wilderness teeming with magic beasts. According to legend, some of these knights possessed immense strength, others could spew flames, some could transform into beasts, while others were impervious to blades and spears. But from the way Kevin spoke, it seemed these legendary knights had some connection to wizards. What do you mean? Are you suggesting these legendary knights are also the ancestors of wizards? Richard guessed. Not exactly, but it's pretty close. Kevin's eyes shifted, coyly holding back. It seems this is classified information I'll need to join to discover. Richard pondered, his gaze shifting from Kevin to the group of nobles behind him and then back to Kevin. I have a question, and if you answer it for me, I'll join your alliance. Richard sat up straight, his expression turning serious. Please, ask. Why would that knight and the 2 prospective apprentices form an alliance with you? Kevin's alliance seemed quite odd to Richard. Members of an alliance should each have a purpose, or at least the majority of them should. Apart from the knight and wizard apprentices, the others in Kevin's alliance seemed not to be burdens per se, but at least they were not of much use. Such a misshapen alliance, by all logic, should not exist. Yet its existence implied there was some inner support unknown to Richard. Richard speculated that this support might be the magic tools spoken of by the nobles. That question is simple, Kevin said, as if relieved, because most of us possess. Kevin! A short shout interrupted Kevin. It was a woman from the nobility, clad in purple. In the Golden Bird Flower Kingdom, purple signified nobility, and to wear such attire, one's family must at least have produced a duke. Seeing this, Richard shook his head in resignation, chiding himself for entertaining any illusions about nobles. It seems our cooperation will not be possible after all. Please take your leave. Richard rose to see his guests out, not giving Kevin a chance to explain further. If those nobles could show Richard even half, or even a third, of the respect Kevin did, he would have considered joining their organization. Amongst so many apprentices, Kevin was certainly not the only one forming an alliance. If they were to enter the exam, these alliances would primarily prey upon individual apprentices. But the attitude of these nobles was such that Richard didn't dare trust them with his back. Moreover, Ali had also become an apprentice. Why would teaming up with Ali, someone he knew well and trusted, not be better than teaming up with these nobles? Seeing Richard's resolute demeanor, Kevin said nothing more and, following etiquette, shook hands with Richard and departed. After they left, Richard opened the palm of the hand he had used to shake with Kevin. A piece of paper filled with wizard language suddenly appeared in his palm. This Kevin is quite interesting, Richard smiled and casually tucked the note into his pocket. Half an hour later, after maintenance, the airship resumed high-speed flight, and all the apprentices returned to their cramped rooms. Richard sat on his bed, replaying the fight in his mind. He had cast magic missile 8 times, using up about half of his magic power. This meant that if he were to use all his magic power, he could cast magic missile a total of 15 times. Although described in books as feeble and weak, to the point that no one except novice wizard apprentices would waste magic power so, the potency equivalent to that of bullets surprised Richard when actually used. 15 magic missiles amounted to 15 bullets. With such power, Richard was confident that as long as he wasn't ambushed or attacked by a group, he could definitely pass the exam. Having replayed the battle in his mind, Richard took the note out of his pocket. The message inside was simple: Kevin proposed to hire Richard not to kill him during the entrance exam for the price of 1 magic stone. The payment, a magic stone, would be settled after admission. The mind of a noble who started in trade is much better than that of those idiots, Richard remarked as he stuffed the note back into his pocket. For Richard, this deal meant gaining a magic stone without needing to do anything. And for Kevin, getting what he wanted, an assurance of safety in the exam from a wizard apprentice who was essentially a predator, seemed undoubtedly worthwhile. It was a win-win trade. After its maintenance, the airship did not slow down at any point during the journey. For 10 continuous days, the airship flew non-stop to its designated location. As the leader of the recruiting wizards and wielding a massive sword the size of a door, Airlie beheld the towering black spire piercing the clouds and issued an order. Prepare to land. They had arrived at Black Tower Wizard Academy. Chapter 9. The airship is preparing to land. All apprentices, indoor activities are prohibited. Repeat. The airship is preparing to land. All apprentices, indoor activities are prohibited. The eerie voice of the food delivery automaton echoed throughout the flying airship. After nearly a month of flight, this group of apprentices had finally arrived at their destination, the Black Tower Wizard Academy. Richard sat quietly on his bed. After 10 days of recovery, his magic power had long since been fully restored. Ali, too, had completed the construction of her magic rebound and learned all the zero-ring spells during these 10 days. Kevin's recruitment made them realize that if they were to fight alone, they would still be at a considerable disadvantage in this examination. Thus, the two had formed an offensive and defensive alliance as soon as Ali completed her magic rebound. "Richard, what should we do when we get there?" Ali sat on her bed, clutching the bag issued by the wizard in her hands, her knuckles turning somewhat pale. The upcoming life and death struggle filled the girl, who had never even killed a chicken, with dread. Even though she was now a wizard apprentice. "What else can we do, just kill people?" Richard's voice was very relaxed, as if the imminent slaughter was no more than going out for a meal. Boom! As soon as Richard finished speaking, the two of them felt the room shake. The loud sound of the airship landing instantly transmitted over. "The airship has landed, all apprentices take your personal belongings, and leave the airship in order." Richard and Ali picked up their things and walked out the door, forming a line according to the recruitment wizard's arrangement and, one by one, disembarked. As they exited the airship, the skeleton wizard distributing the apprentices' pouches also handed each person a strap filled with tubes, each containing mostly a tube of emerald liquid. "It seems this is the nutritional potion," Richard thought to himself. Outside the airship was an open area, the lighting was a bit dim, with dozens of magic airships arranged neatly in the sky, their huge bodies covering the sun. In their shadows, tens of thousands of apprentices stood in a large square formation. Richard followed the line into the square, and floating above the formation was a wizard in a black robe with glasses and a white beard, standing quietly in the air. "Zeppelin-type airship number 050 has arrived, with 198 prospective apprentices." The leader, Taylor, reported to the sky with a respectful bow. Only after the floating wizard nodded slightly did Taylor quietly depart. Silence. The floating wizard's voice was not loud, but it reached every apprentice's ears. Richard looked at the wizard, and a fear from the depths of his soul suddenly surged in his heart. This wizard was not exhibiting any aura, but to him, he seemed like a completely different being from the recruitment wizards. Could this be what a real wizard looks like? Welcome to Black Tower Wizard Academy's 432nd entrance examination. I am your deputy dean, Alex, and the examiner for your test. There will be 10 examination venues in total, with 1,000 people in each. Each venue will contain 10 magic beasts, and these beasts will have magic tools prepared by the Academy. Apprentice with sufficient strength may hunt them at will. Details about other exam rules can be found on page 32 of the entrance regulations. Those who haven't reviewed them may do so at their leisure. Now, begin the examination. With that, Deputy Dean Alex waved his hand, and radiant beams of light arose beneath the apprentice formation. These lights intertwined with each other, seemingly forming a complex geometric pattern. Watching the light beneath his feet, a flash of panic suddenly struck Richard's heart. Could this examination scramble all the apprentices? Hum. A buzzing sounded in Richard's ears, and the scene before him turned into an abstract painting made up of numerous color blocks, causing dizziness and vertigo. Is this teleportation? Richard muttered to himself, feeling a wave of nausea surging to the back of his throat. After about 3 or 4 seconds, Richard's vision began to clear, revealing a lush primeval forest before his eyes. Richard leaned against a tree and vomited bile, finding the sensation of teleportation truly unpleasant. Led astray by those damned nobles, those fools have no clue about the specifics of the exam. Now, I can only hope that Ali toughens up. After spitting out the bile, Richard grumbled to himself, then immediately saw beams of light shooting up into the sky. The dazzling light was clearly visible even in the daytime. The location of these beams of light was where apprentices needed to arrive within 14 days. Richard strapped a belt filled with vials around his waist, then immediately headed in the direction of the light beams without wasting any time. The rule of the Academy was that apprentices must reach a certain destination within 14 days, which meant that arriving early was presumably allowed. And finishing the exam earlier meant safety sooner, which was common sense that Richard understood without thinking. With the end of the teleportation, the silent primeval forest began to bustle with activity as the exam commenced. Tens of thousands of apprentices began to move almost instantly after the teleportation had ended. There were strong and weak among these apprentices, including knights and official wizard apprentices. They each performed divine skills, all heading towards the towering beams of light. Riley struggled to move through the dense woods. As a knight attendant with exceptional talent, his robust physique, coupled with wizard's magic potions, allowed him to be up and about shortly after sustaining injuries. But tragically, as the effects of the magic potions wore off, his groin began to suffer continuous, unending pain. The pain seemed to remind him, "You're not a man anymore. Damn it, bastard, wait till I master magic, I'll rape you then kill you, tear you into a million pieces." A fatigued Riley leaned against a large tree, cursing loudly. His eyes were bloodshot, his teeth clenched, hatred acted like hallucinogens, numbing his nerves, causing him also to have illusions. For instance, he thought he saw the figure that had emasculated him emerge from the forest. "Oh, look who it is. Now the crystal ball has a destination." This figure seemed pleasantly surprised to see him, and with a raise of the arm, Riley once again saw that blue glow. The blue glow that had castrated him. It wasn't an illusion. He had really encountered that mongrel. A surge of intense fear welled up inside Riley, and he turned to run. Although he constantly cursed Richard, every night after his injury, Riley would wake up startled by visions of Richard and his blue glow. Richard had nearly become his nightmare. Now, the nightmare had come to life. Bang! Having left the flying airship, Richard held nothing back. A magic missile flew from his fingertip, drawing a straight line through the air, then precisely landing on the back of Riley's head. Then Richard saw Riley's entire occiput cave in, red and white matter spattering all around. Ugh! Watching the corpse, Richard couldn't help but retch. Those who kill often know that the first time you kill and retch, is due to the intense fear and shock of bloodshed, a normal reaction. Though Richard didn't feel fear, as someone who had never even slaughtered a chicken, the pungent smell of blood was quite suffocating. After heaving for a while, Richard approached and took down Riley's crystal ball and the nutritional potions he was carrying. With these things, he could focus on making his way. After collecting the items, Richard searched through Riley's pockets and, feeling around, he found a black, diamond-shaped crystal. Inside it, Richard sensed an extremely rich magic power. Could this be a magic stone? Chapter 10. Magic stones had been mentioned by the nobles aboard the airship, but this was the first time Richard actually laid eyes on one. This magic stone was about the size of a thumb pad, jet black, and diamond-shaped. It resembled a black gemstone under the sunlight. Richard used his spiritual power to sense the magic stone and found that the magic power stored within it not only exceeded his magic rebound but was also effortless to absorb. This was undoubtedly great news for Richard. A wizard apprentice's magic rebound had a limited storage for magic power. Once the magic power from the rebound was exhausted, even a wizard would need to absorb magic power anew. However, the efficiency of recovering magic rebound by absorbing magic power directly from nature was very low. It took Richard 2 full days on the airship to recover only half of the magic power he had used up. But with this magic stone, the time it would take for Richard to recover his magic power could be reduced from 2 days to 2 minutes. No wonder a magic stone can fetch 100,000 gold coins in the Golden Bird Flower Market. If someone carried 2 of them, they could walk sideways in an exam as long as they were a wizard apprentice, Richard exclaimed, holding the magic stone. By that logic, if wizards don't have any special methods, the battles between wizards could also turn into a competition of personal wealth. With these thoughts, Richard's eyes glowed with even more fervor when he looked at the magic stone. The magic stone was not just wealth, but also a part of a wizard's strength. Pocketing the magic stone, Richard continued on his journey. But this time was different. Before moving, a sudden flash of light swept over his body. 0 ring spell, light body skill. With the magic stone as a backup source of magic power, Richard was no longer frugal with his spells. As the effects of the light body skill took effect, Richard immediately felt lighter. His steps quickened, and the pocket at his waist felt lighter too. Maintaining the light body skill for half an hour, Richard managed to cover nearly twice the distance he would have without the spell in that time. If he kept this up, he would only need about 3 days to reach the location of the light column. But as Richard pressed on with all his might, a whistling sound came from within the woods. Whoosh! Instinctively, Richard ducked. He saw an ice cone fly out from the woods, whisking past the top of his head. That was close. Peering at the ice cone that had bored a hole in the tree trunk, Richard felt a wave of relief. If he had ducked a second later, the ice cone could have shattered his skull. I can't be so reckless. As important as it is to hurry, I cannot lose sight of the bigger picture, Richard reminded himself. With a raise of his hand, he launched a magic missile in the direction of the ice cone. Since someone had made a move against him, it was only natural for him to return the favor. A blue glow shot forth. Without waiting to see the outcome, Richard immediately cast another light body skill on himself and, crouching low, he zigzagged toward the source of the ice cone. Whoosh! Another ice cone followed. But this ice cone was far off the mark from Richard. It seems this person has panicked, Richard thought to himself. Their ambush failed to kill with a single hit, and they lost their composure once they faced resistance. Do they even deserve to kill me? Richard scoffed at the thought and soon caught sight of the attacker. The ambusher was a petite figure dressed in lavish attire, a beautiful noble girl with panic written all over her face. Her hand, adorned with a ring, shook as she attempted to launch another ice cone skill to finish off Richard. Don't come any closer. Stay away. Don't you dare come closer. As Richard drew ever closer, the girl suddenly squeezed her eyes shut and let out a piercing scream, firing another ice cone. But the gods did not pity her, this ice cone was as far from Richard as before. It's over. Richard stood a short distance from the young girl, his expression cold and indifferent, as a hint of blue light flashed from the tip of his raised arm. He harbored no sympathy for the fairer sex. Bang! Red and white splattered. Approaching the girl's corpse with indifference, Richard noticed two bags beside her, indicating that another unfortunate soul had already fallen victim to a stealthy attack. He pulled the ring off the girl's finger. This ring, made of grey metal, had an old look to it, with a metal setting designed to hold a magic stone. So this is what the nobles refer to as magic tools, the underlying reason why Kevin's alliance was able to be established. Racked by inspiration, Richard wanted to refine it using the miracle furnace to see if he could acquire the method for crafting such a ring. However, the miracle furnace didn't react to it at all, as if the quality of the ring was too low to catch its interest. After removing the ring, Richard searched the girl's body further. Ultimately, he found 3 magic stones and a magic dagger. Similarly, the miracle furnace showed no reaction to the dagger either. The nobles are really loaded. If all nobles are such idiots, it makes me want to hunt them down. Examining the dagger in his hand, which had an indent similar to that of a magic stone at the base of the handle, Richard placed a magic stone into it and immediately, a line of runes appeared on the blade that was previously plain. Swinging the dagger a couple of times, Richard found it easily plunged into the trunk of a nearby tree that was likely over 100 years old. What a sharp dagger! Richard exclaimed in surprise, immediately recalling the Windcrow sword skill he had acquired from the sword of the first Baron of Heason. Although he was now a wizard apprentice, if someone got too close, he would instantly revert to being the vulnerable son of a farmer. Although the dagger wasn't long, it was still a formidable weapon, capable of employing a fraction of the Windcrow sword skill. With a third of his Windcrow sword skill and this dagger which could slice through metal as if it were mud, not only did he compensate for his weakness at close range, but his strength also rose a notch. Suppressing the urge to laugh out loud, Richard removed the magic stone from the dagger's handle. Good steel should be reserved for the blade edge, he wasn't affluent enough to waste magic stones recklessly. After securing the magic stone, Richard wore the ice cone ring on his finger, tucked the magic dagger at his waist, and continued on his journey. The rest of the items on the corpse were of no use to Richard, and bringing them along would only be a burden, so he just left them behind for whoever might be fortunate enough to find them. Learning from his experiences, Richard set out with caution, alert and vigilant as he made his way through the forest. Although this slowed him down, it was safer. In this manner, Richard survived the first day of the test. In the evening, the forest was alive with the sound of insects, as Richard piled up a heap of fallen leaves beneath a large tree to serve as his bed for the night. The temperature in this primeval forest wasn't particularly high, but it was a vast improvement over the cold winter months of the Heason territory. Even at night, Richard was merely cold, not shivering uncontrollably. Opening a bottle of nutritional potion, Richard took a sip. The potion tasted strange, reminiscent of diluted, fermented vinegar mixed with grass juice sealed away for a month. But despite the off-putting flavor, the effect of the potion was genuinely remarkable. A tube of nutritional potion warmed Richard's belly instantly, eliminating the sensation of hunger from his stomach. After his drink, Richard lay under the tree, exhaustion from the day washing over him like a tide. However, he did not choose to sleep, instead, he opted for meditation. While aboard the airship, Richard had discovered that the meditation method could alleviate mental fatigue, and 2 hours of meditation was even more beneficial than 8 hours of sleep. In this treacherous primeval forest, spending more time awake was undeniably advantageous. Moreover, meditation also had the effect of enhancing spiritual power, making it a perfect solution. But as he began to meditate, a strange animal roar echoed through the forest. Chapter 11. Roar. A few kilometers away from Richard, a bizarre-looking magic beast was chasing a group of wizard apprentices. "What on earth is this?" an apprentice cried out in panic. He had been resting comfortably in the woods when suddenly he saw a crowd of people coming toward him, with the monster following behind them. "Are you an idiot? This is the magic beast the academy placed in the examination arena," another apprentice retorted angrily. Before becoming apprentices, the term magic beast was merely a myth. According to the legends, various magic beasts committed many atrocities, killed people like flies, but would all eventually be slain by knights, becoming the spoils of heroic battles. However, when these creatures stepped out of the realm of legend, people realized just how laughable those stories were. This flesh monster, over 2 meters tall at the shoulder, over 4 meters long, with 7 heads and 8 legs, could trample a squad of knights to death merely with its weight and speed. What was even more terrifying was that among its 7 heads, aside from the central goat head, the other 6 were stitched together by man. It was a synthetic monster. The stitched heads on the adjacent bodies roared wildly, spitting acid and flames, occasionally bending down their heads to swallow apprentices who came too close. Apprentices sporadically cast spells, but either they missed due to panic, or the spells were too weak and left only fleeting scars on the body of the magic beast. Limbs, blood, screams, roars. The whole wood seemed like hell on earth. Inside the central black tower of the Black Tower Wizard Academy, 2 wizards were staring at a crystal ball in front of them. The crystal ball was live-streaming the scene of the 7-headed magic sheep's rampage. "Deputy Dean, the magic beasts we released this time are quite effective, aren't they? I personally created these, and their quality is guaranteed," a wizard bragged. Beside the crystal ball, Eric, serving as the entrance exam invigilator, looked up and adjusted his glasses. "Yalad, did you really make this thing yourself? You lazybones, did you really bother to craft this trinket?" The wizard referred to as Yalad stiffened. "Not saying anything now." Eric smiled at Yalad, "Just bring evidence to prove that this isn't your apprentice's work, and next plain war, I'll make you a pawn. A 3 rings wizard as your pawn, guaranteeing you earn loads in the next war." "Cough cough, Deputy Dean, let's just watch the magic beast." Yalad coughed and steered the conversation away. "Speaking of which, why did the Dean suddenly decide to change the exams this year? Although we took a loss last time, we made enough to not be in such a rush to replenish wizards." Deputy Dean Eric shook his head, "I don't know either." Although he was the Dean's assistant, he also disagreed with the Dean on this matter. The elite standard for graduating wizards from the Black Tower Wizard Academy, an institution established less than an epoch ago, was a fundamental strategy that allowed it to quickly stabilize and develop. But since the Dean made such a decision, he must have his reasons. He's a 4 rings great wizard who can directly receive messages from the Truth Council. All we lesser wizards need to do is quietly follow his will. As the roars of the beast grew closer, Richard's meditation plans were completely ruined. He climbed a large tree, trying to see what was happening in the distance by the moonlight. But before he could get a good look, a dazzling burst of flames erupted from the nearby woods. Boom! The sound, almost like thunder, made even Richard, several hundred meters away, feel deafened. It seems someone has used a powerful magic tool, that magic beast must have been dealt with. Richard jumped down from the tree, intending to continue meditating. But it seemed as though fate was against him today, for shortly after he jumped down, that hellish beastly roar resounded once again. And it sounded even closer this time. "I just can't get any peace." Richard furrowed his brows and immediately cast light body skill and silence technique on himself. Silence technique wasn't very useful to Richard during the day, but in the dimly lit night, this 0-ring spell was almost like invisibility. Once the spell was cast, Richard found a bush to hide in. He had no intention of picking up leftovers. Though the magic beast was injured by a magic tool, a crippled ship still has 3 pounds of nails. He just needed to stay lower, play safe, and he would definitely pass the entrance exam without risking it for a magic tool. Bang! 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 The voice of the magic beast grew closer, its heavy footsteps further convincing Richard to stay hidden. This sounded like a big guy, and if it wasn't killed with one strike, he was in for serious trouble. Roar! A 7-headed magic beast burst out from the forest with originally 7 heads, now only 3 remained intact. The spots of the other 4 heads looked like they had been bombed, charred around the wound. Is this the magic beast? It looks like an experimental subject. Richard looked at the thick stitches under the head of the 7-headed magic beast and a speculation flashed through his mind. This magic beast might just be some wizard's experiment, or even an experiment conducted by a wizard apprentice. If this thing was created by someone, then could he extract the process of making magic beasts using the miracle furnace? If he could, then could he also create such a magic beast? A fiery greed flickered through Richard's heart, but his rationality immediately stopped him. There's no need to create more trouble, let's pass the examination first. Richard suppressed his greed and wanted to wait for the magic beast to leave. But at that moment, one of the remaining 3 heads, a wolf head, suddenly twitched a couple of times. A wolf's sense of smell is tens of thousands of times better than that of a human, even in the mixed sense of the primeval forest. The human scent on Richard was as clear as the sun. Awoo! The wolf head let out a howl, its head striving to turn in Richard's direction. I've been spotted. Richard's heart tightened, and he immediately took out a complete magic stone to replace the one on his ice cone ring. The magic stone on the ring had been worn down to 1/5 by its previous owner, and this magic beast didn't seem like it could be dealt with just one ice cone. Thud, 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 thud. The 7-headed magic beast that had detected human traces immediately charged towards Richard. Human flesh was the most delicious food for it and the most effective medicine for its wounds. The magic beast surged forward. Its hooves were as big as bowls, its roar as loud as thunder. Dirt and grass splattered under its hooves, and dead branches and leaves danced under its roar. It was like the mythological 8-legged steed, unstoppable and unmatched. But with a loud boom the magic beast suddenly lost balance and plummeted to the ground. Its massive body plowed the ground like a bulldozer. 2 ice cones, each as thick as an arm and about a meter long, had brutally broken its 2 front legs. Thump, 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 thump. Richard clutched his chest. Under the influence of adrenaline, his heart pounded like a drum, blood surging through his veins like tidal waves. If he had been a second slower, even just 1 second, he would have died in the jaws of the magic beast. Even this was a heavily injured magic beast. Had it been uninjured, Richard didn't dare imagine how terrifying it would have been. Richard steadied himself, and again shot an ice cone at the only head without stitches of the trying to stand magic beast, effectively splitting it open. The magic beast convulsed for a while before finally returning to stillness. It's finally dead. Richard cautiously approached, and after confirming that the magic beast was thoroughly dead, he placed his hand on its body. But the outcome was deeply disappointing. The miracle furnace showed absolutely no response to the magic beast. Did I think wrong? Richard's brow furrowed slightly, contemplating for a moment before pulling out the magic dagger from his waist and began disemboweling the magic beast. With the enhancement of magic power, the dagger could cut through iron as if it were mud, and Richard felt no resistance while gutting. As soon as the belly of the magic beast was opened, a foul-smelling pool of blood immediately flowed out. The organs inside the magic beast were rotting at a visible rate. Richard, looking at the thick, foul-smelling blood, steeled his heart and reached indiscriminately inside the belly of the magic beast. When he touched something that was still pulsating, the miracle furnace finally trembled slightly. Material: low-grade synthetic beast core. Extractable craft: low-grade synthetic beast core creation. Extraction cost: 15 spiritual power. Extract now. Chapter 12. The synthetic beast core looked like an enlarged neuron, with several thick blood vessels extending outward from the core. When the magic beast was alive, a massive amount of blood was transported to every part of the body through these vessels, delivering a constant stream of energy to every corner of the magic beast's body. But now, the magic beast was rapidly decaying, while the core still pulsated healthily. Richard held the synthetic beast core, its outward extending blood vessels now sealed off, with the remaining blood beginning a tiny circulation inside it. It felt to Richard not so much like an organ, but more like a type of parasitic creature. No. Add latest chapters at free.novelo only. Richard made a decision. After having fainted during the last extraction, he had learned from the painful experience and decided that he would absolutely perform extractions only in safe places from now on. Moreover, creating the synthetic beast core at this critical time was useless, and there was no loss in waiting to extract it later. It had only been a few minutes since the magic beast had died before it turned into a pile of white bones. Richard searched in the sewage and a magic wand wrapped in a bag caught his eye. It seems this is the magic tool prepared by the Academy. Richard got his hands on the magic wand, it was about half a meter long and weighed around 1 kg. The body of the wand was pitch black with a spherical crystal embedded at the top, the size of a baby's fist. After Richard explored it with his spiritual power, a message that seemed to be left by the maker immediately became clear in his mind. This magic wand is engraved with the lesser fireball technique, with a recharge time of 3 minutes, and does not possess a self-charging circuit. Each use consumes 1/3 of a standard magic stone. Richard was amazed at the method of information transfer, a method he had never encountered before. It felt incredibly curious. Lesser fireball technique, each use costs 1/3 of a magic stone, plus the charging time. Richard waved the magic wand a couple of times. The cost effectiveness seems a bit low compared to the ice cone ring in this exam. The power of the lesser fireball technique should be higher than that of the ice cone, but the enemies he was facing now, besides magic beasts, were almost all high offense low defense types. The ice cone skill, which had virtually no charging time and low consumption, was perfectly suited to the current environment. The lesser fireball technique seemed like overkill. But having it is better than nothing. Who knows, I might encounter a magic beast later. Richard shook his head, feeling he was being a bit too greedy. After securing the synthetic beast core, Richard cast the silence technique on himself. It was the middle of the night, but the commotion caused by the magic beast was not small, and there might be people looking to take advantage of it. It was always better to be safe. Shortly after Richard left, a few apprentices looking to scavenge arrived beside the carcass of the magic beast. "We're late. Someone got here first. What do we do now? A wasted trip." The apprentices exchanged glances, then turned to look at the bald apprentice who was leading them. After a moment of contemplation, the bald apprentice was about to make a decision when suddenly a tall figure leaped out from the woods. This person was 2 meters tall, with a burly figure clad in chain armor, carrying 7 or 8 bags around his waist, wielding a 2-handed greatsword in one hand, and holding a half-dead wizard apprentice in the other. "You don't have to think about what to do, because you're all going to die here." The next day, the sun rose as usual. Richard stood up from a pile of dry leaves. After meditating, his spirit was as refreshed as if he had slept for a night, but a good spirit didn't mean his body was fine. After a day of travel and a night of pursuit, ache coursed through Richard's entire body. But the road still had to be traveled. Dragging his sore body, Richard set out again. The havoc wrought by last night's magic beast was not without benefit. Apart from the magic tool on its body, the forest was also trampled into several small paths by the creatures. This saved Richard quite a bit of effort. With the light body skill's blessing, Richard easily covered half the distance on the second day. And as he got closer to the meeting point, the density of apprentices also grew higher. These apprentices had at least 2 or 3 bags each, and upon meeting each other, except for a few with odd temperaments, the vast majority would display their crystal balls and then turn away. The ones who made it halfway weren't easy targets, most had blood on their hands. With the risks outweighing the benefits, few were willing to gamble with their lives. At night, Richard, as usual, hid among dry leaves for meditation. Although those who reached this area had mostly completed the examination conditions, it's always better to be safe than sorry. During the day, Richard always felt like someone was trailing him. This sensation made him feel as if he were on pins and needles, and he struggled to enter a meditative state. Not far from Richard, a tall figure with a dozen bags strapped around his waist crouched in a tree, silently observing Richard's hiding spot. Followed him for a day, and this kid did nothing but travel, avoiding others whenever possible. Such a coward, and he's the one who killed that magic beast. He had initially thought that an apprentice capable of killing a magic beast would at least be a knight, a worthy opponent. But after a day of observation, this person was no different from a straw bag. Could he be hiding his true strength? Engrossed in meditation, Richard's heart suddenly tightened, and the piercing sound of something slicing through the air made him instinctively duck. With a thud, Richard saw a wooden spear as thick as an arm appear beside him. The spear, probably longer than a meter with one end sharpened, quivered continuously at the tail end after embedding itself in a tree trunk. Someone had attacked a skilled one at that. Richard's heart sank, and he immediately gripped the fireball magic wand he'd acquired the day before. To do something like that with a piece of wood, the attacker must either have a very powerful magic tool or be a genius knight. Richard hoped for the former, because the latter could possess both magic tools and a knight's prowess. "You dodged. Seems like you do have some skill." A voice came from not far away, and Richard turned to see a large figure wielding a 2-handed greatsword, stepping out from the woods with a dozen bags tied around his waist. A dozen bags, looks like I've run into a madman. Richard's hold on his magic wand tightened unconsciously. In this exam where killing one person was enough to pass, this man wore the bags of over a dozen slain apprentices as trophies at his waist. The man was clearly mad, and a powerful one at that. "Allow me to introduce myself," the large figure shouted. "I am Sabin Chavez of the Northern Empire. May I ask for your name?" Using the moonlight filtering through the trees, Richard made out the newcomer's features: red hair, slanted eyes, high nose bridge, and a scar stretching from his nose bridge to the corners of his eyes. The great sword rested on his shoulder, his chain armor bore many tears, yet his body showed no injuries. "This is a master, possibly a knight," Richard concluded. No reply. After waiting in vain for Richard to divulge his name, Sabin shrugged with resignation and, a second later, charged toward Richard with the great sword. "If you won't even give your name, then you can go to hell." Richard watched Sabin coldly, as a red gleam flickered from the magic wand in his hand. "Idiot! Take this fireball technique." Chapter 13. Sabin Chavez, the genius knight of the Northern Empire, became a knight at the supreme young age of 14. Within the Northern Empire, countless youths saw him as an idol, and countless girls went mad for him. But aside from his opponents, no one knew that this promising knight was actually a madman. Sabin loved to fight, adored the kill, the sensation of his blade slicing through muscle and skin intoxicated him, and the stronger the enemy, the more intense the pleasure derived from his blade. When Sabin was chosen to become a wizard apprentice, the king of the Northern Empire himself hoped to plead for him, wanting the wizards to keep this genius knight. But Sabin refused it all. To him, the power of a wizard was fascinating. If he could use his blade to kill a wizard, he reckoned that kind of pleasure could elevate him to heaven. So Sabin became a wizard apprentice, participating in this entrance exam. Powerful opponents, lawful killing, all of this was simply heaven to him. Therefore, when he saw an apprentice capable of slaying a magic beast, his heart was incredibly excited. This was what he was after. Until a dazzling blaze of light appeared before him. An orange-red meteor shot out from Richard's hand, flying directly towards Sabin. Sabin felt an unprecedented fear in the presence of this fireball, a fear even greater than when he faced a magic beast. What kind of magic is this? Sabin didn't have time to think, he instinctively wanted to dodge, but as he brushed past the fireball, exploded. Boom! The violent flames turned all of Sabin's clothing to ashes, and the chain armor, meant for defense, became like red-hot branding irons, leaving behind trails of charred marks on Sabin's body. The shockwave instantly blasted him away, he didn't even have time to react before he was flung like a cannonball, his great sword slipping from his grasp. On the other side of the fireball technique, Richard watched all this quietly. Before him, a transparent barrier blocked all the remnants of the explosion. Zero-ring spell, force field barrier. Hey! This is lesser fireball technique? Is the gap between one-ring magic and zero-ring magic this big? Richard looked at the 3-meter diameter, half-meter deep crater next to Sabin and felt a flicker of shock. This spell's power was almost comparable to a cannonball. To take a hit from such a spell, that man ought to be dead. Richard looked toward the woods, and suddenly he heard an angry roar coming from the forest. "Damn it! I'm going to chop you to pieces!" A black figure burst out from the woods, a large body with charred skin. It was Sabin, who had just been blasted away. He had taken a hit from a lesser fireball technique, and yet, he hadn't died. Richard took a few steps back and shot out 2 magic missiles from his hand, trying to stop Sabin, but Sabin, after rushing from the woods, did not continue the chase. He sidestepped and dodged Richard's magic missiles. Without time to think further, Richard immediately tried to use the ice cone skill to give Sabin a wide-open chest, but before he could release the ice cone, Sabin's transformation shocked Richard. White breath continuously billowed from Sabin's nose and mouth, and a layer of golden fur began to grow on his previously charred skin. The golden fur grew thicker and longer, and Sabin's body also inflated, growing larger. Man, is this beastification? Seeing Sabin's transformation, Richard instantly thought of the legendary knight from the Golden Bird Flower legend. Could this madman be a descendant of the legendary knight? Richard raised his hand to finish Sabin with an ice cone skill, but Sabin slapped his hand and deflected the trajectory of the ice cone beside him. This is going to be troublesome. One hit didn't finish it. Richard discreetly grasped the magic dagger in his hand. From the performance just now, this madman was definitely a close combat type. "You're the first to make me use my legendary bloodline." Sabin moved his body, the charred skin peeling off, and new skin grew a layer of golden fur under the influence of the legendary bloodline. Richard silently checked the charging time of the fireball magic wand. 2 more minutes to recharge. This was becoming troublesome. Sabin, having completed his transformation, tore off his chain armor, leaving only the arm bracelets on both arms. His muscles were visibly swelling, and the armor that had fitted well before now became a restraint. Legendary bloodline? Are you, sir, a descendant of the legendary knight? Richard wanted to delay time with some taunting words. As long as he waited for the fireball technique to recharge, this beast-iffied madman, even if he were the legendary knight, would turn to char. Richard wasn't deceived by his appearance, having been blasted at point-blank range by a lesser fireball technique comparable to a cannonball. This madman had definitely sustained serious internal injuries. Internal injuries were much harder to recover from than external ones. Just one more fireball, and this madman was sure to die on the spot. But Sabin wouldn't have it as he wished. Opening his legendary bloodline, Sabin felt an inexhaustible power surging within his body. Although he knew it was an illusion, Sabin still reveled in it a bit. As Richard had predicted, Sabin's internal injury was not as easily healed as external wounds, and activating his legendary bloodline even tended to aggravate it. He had to decide quickly. Bang! With a step, Sabin's speed skyrocketed, and in the blink of an eye, he had crossed tens of meters to appear right in front of Richard. Go to hell! Sabin threw a punch, and the strong wind from it even made Richard's hair fly. If that punch had connected, Richard's fate wouldn't have been much better than Riley's. But only a buzz was heard, and the air in front of Richard rippled like the surface of water. Sabin's fist stopped in front of Richard's face, unable to advance any further. Force field barrier, kid. With a sneer, Richard drew his dagger in a dangerous arc, aiming straight for Sabin's chest. Ice cone skill requires acceleration distance, and thus isn't very powerful at close range, but the dagger was just right for this distance. Seeing that his strike didn't succeed, Sabin's heart sank, and he turned his arm to block the dagger with his arm bracelet. The two clanged against each other, producing a grating sound that was harsh on the ears, and when they parted, a shallow scratch had appeared on Sabin's arm bracelet. What a powerful dagger! Such a hard arm bracelet! The two separated, Richard had already abandoned the thought of attacking again. His last strike had the advantage of surprise, and still, it didn't succeed. Now that Sabin was on guard, a reckless attack would certainly expose a fatal flaw. After Sabin parted, he retrieved his two-handed greatsword, which, even after the baptism of the fireball technique, remained straight and shiny, a remarkable item like the arm bracelet, possibly even the very sword once worn by the legendary knight. Greatsword in hand, Sabin's presence soared instantly, his golden fur standing on end without any wind. There's a high wall between unarmed and armed combat. I have decided to make your head my trophy and place it with my most cherished hunted beasts. Sabin, gripping the great sword, spouted his wild claim. The next instant, the great sword collided with the dagger. The force field barrier was breached. Ding! Richard struggled to fend off the great sword. Even with the force field barriers weakening, the power behind the blade made it difficult for Richard to withstand. This is just possessing a legendary bloodline. How strong must the legendary knight of old have been? After failing to make the cut, Sabin twisted his wrist, and in an instant, the two-handed great sword was slashing toward Richard's other side. But to Richard, skilled in the wind crow sword skill, Sabin's technique was like a child's scribble. Ding! Seeing both slashes thwarted, a glint of thought flashed across Sabin's eyes. This kid's skillful but lacks strength. Even if my sword is weakened by that barrier, he can hardly fend it off. So if I just rely on strength, this kid will definitely not be able to resist. With a change of strategy, Sabin's moves also changed, striking right at Richard's weakness. In a flash, Richard was retreating step by step, struggling to fend off the attacks, despite his skill in the wind crow sword skill, in face of the weapon and power disadvantage. Ha 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 ha! Where are your spells now? Sabin laughed wildly, his momentum growing with every blow, each movement grand and entirely offensive, intent on taking his opponent's life. Richard used his spiritual power to check the magic wand, but in that split second of distraction, Sabin found an opening. Suddenly, the great sword pierced through the force field barrier, leaving a wound an inch deep in Richard's chest. Hiss! The intense pain made Richard suck in a breath of cold air, and his mind started to dull. Subsequent strikes continued, and Richard was marred after each. Luckily, all his injuries were merely superficial, and under the effect of adrenaline, he gradually adjusted until his mind was clear again. Just 10 seconds left, I need to create distance now. Richard's expression remained calm, knowing full well that spell collisions have no ability to discern friend from foe. He would be just as affected by the fireball technique if too close. Richard silently counted down the time, then suddenly unleashed his spells. Magic missile mixed with ice cone skill halted Sabin's movement, allowing Richard to widen the gap between them. Damn, he's going to use that spell. Seeing Richard create distance, Sabin felt a sense of dread welling up in him, the fear of being blasted by a fireball urging him to instinctively flee. But though he was fast, the spells were faster. Richard waved his magic wand, and an orange fireball burst forth from his hands, striking Sabin like a meteor. In a thunderous explosion, the genius knight of the Northern Empire became fertilizer for the forest, just as countless others had over the past 4,000 years. Chapter 14. Finally solved. Richard wiped the sweat from his forehead. This battle was the most perilous moment since he had arrived in this world. If not for the fireball magic wand, this powerful weapon, 10 of him wouldn't have been enough to stand against that madman. After searching through the forest, Richard collected Sabin's arm bracelet and great sword. To Richard's surprise, the pair of arm bracelets turned out to be magic tools, and they even had the ability to recharge themselves with magic power. The great sword, however, was simply made of extraordinary material and was not a magic tool itself. Richard tried refining the arm bracelet with the miracle furnace, but the furnace remained unresponsive. What exactly is the pattern to this refining skill? I can refine Heisen Baron's greatsword and the synthetic beast core, but why can't these magic tools be refined? Richard was clueless for the moment and had to put the issue aside. He began to study the function of the arm bracelet. He put the arm bracelet on his arms, and in an instant, a cool surge of energy flowed from his arms throughout his body. The wounds on Richard's body began to clot and heal at a visible rate under the influence of this energy. No wonder that madman couldn't be killed by a barrage of minor fireballs, he was wearing such a treasure. Richard marveled for a moment, then suddenly felt some scratches inside the arm bracelet. After taking it off, he discovered an inscription on the inside. What is this? Richard read it once and found that it detailed a method of breathing. This seemed very familiar to Richard, as if the Heisen Baron from his past life knew something similar. Forget it, I should leave first. Once I'm at the academy, I'll have plenty of time to figure it out. Richard shook his head, put the arm bracelet back on, and once again started on his way. On the 4th day after the exam began, some of the more powerful apprentices had already started arriving at the rendezvous point. Kevin Medici staggered out from the woods. After 4 days of traveling and battling, this young lord, who was neither a knight nor a formal wizard apprentice, was completely exhausted. Fighting, traveling, being on guard, escaping, and finally reaching the rendezvous point. Having completed all this, Kevin felt as if he had transcended, confident that no hardship in this world could defeat him. Griffith, we've arrived, Kevin called back. Behind him, a blonde, brawny man carrying a greatsword was slowly advancing. He was Kevin's teammate and the main reason he had survived being pursued by magic beasts. This man named Griffith had single-handedly slain a magic beast as powerful as a demon. Griffith nodded. Griffith hadn't revealed his identity, but judging by his temperament and his formidable strength, Kevin guessed he must be a cultivator from some monastery. Entering the rendezvous point, Kevin collapsed on the ground, his entire body relaxing at once. The rendezvous point was a safe zone, reaching it meant he was safe. Kevin. At the sound, Kevin looked up and saw a slender figure carrying a greatsword and holding a magic wand emerge from the crowd of apprentices. Richard. On recognizing the person, Kevin was shocked. Compared to his own disheveled appearance, Richard, despite looking a bit ragged, was brimming with vitality. In contrast, Richard hardly seemed like he had just been through a life or death exam. It really is you. Richard walked over to Kevin, smiling, and pulled him up. After all, Kevin still owed him a magic stone. It seems my decision wasn't wrong, aligning myself with you was the right choice. Too bad we never got to use it, Kevin said, smiling wryly to Richard. The alliance he had worked so hard to build had been turned into a joke by a single statement from a wizard. Isn't being alive all that matters? Go and register with the wizard quickly. There's a transmission array at the rendezvous point. It activates for every 100 people, counting your friend, we're about to reach 100. With that, Richard squinted at the brawny blonde man behind Kevin. This blonde giant had been watching him ever since he appeared. "Friend, why are you staring at me?" Griffith bowed slightly to Richard. "It seems Sabin died at your hand. You recognize the owner of this sword?" Richard looked up into the eyes of the brawny man, who was at least a knight. Moreover, judging by his aura, the man had established a magic power circuit. He was a dual cultivation warrior. "Let me introduce you, this is Griffith, a genius knight from another continent." Kevin stepped between the two, acutely sensing that the atmosphere was a bit off. "I know him. Back in the Northern Empire, he always wanted to kill me." Griffith sighed. "He had great talent, what a shame." Seeing that this was not about seeking vengeance, Richard didn't say more. After Kevin and Griffith had registered, the wizard issued the teleportation command. "Prepare for teleportation. Apprentices who experience dizziness from the transmission array, close your eyes. 3, 2, 1, teleport." In an instant, the meeting point flashed with light, and Richard's vision was once again filled with the chaotic colors unique to teleportation. When his vision returned to normal, he saw a scene he would never forget in his life. "This is..." Richard murmured. Before him stood a colossal tower that could only be described as majestic. It reached towards the heavens as if connecting the earth with the divine abode of the gods. The myriad carvings on the tower were so lifelike, they seemed to have souls sealed within them. At the tower's corners, the gargoyle statues with their snarling faces and claws looked as if they might come to life at any moment. This is the central Black Tower. Originally, it was the Wizard Tower of the Dean, only accessible to wizards. After the academy was established, the Dean opened up the first 50 floors for educational purposes. Richard looked toward the source of the voice, which belonged to an owl twice the normal size. The owl spoke human language, clutching a large sack in its talons. "Little fellow, I am the academy inspector and your guide. I am responsible for monitoring whether you all adhere to the school's rules," said the owl before throwing the sack to the ground, which was filled with smaller pouches. "Now get your stuff and follow me. I'll show you around the academy." The composition of Black Tower Wizard Academy was quite straightforward. Apart from the central Black Tower, where classes were normally held, it was divided into 3 areas: the experimental zone, the living district, and the commercial area. The experimental zone was for wizards and wizard apprentices to conduct hazardous experiments and was the largest of the 3 areas. The commercial area, on the other hand, was used for selling experimental materials, casting ingredients, and magic tools. In addition to shops run by wizards from the academy, external wizard commerce companies and wizard apprentices from within the academy also set up their businesses there. The common currency of the commercial area was the academy coin, issued by the academy, but it also accepted magic stones. The value of 1 magic stone was pegged at 100 academy coins. Lastly, the living district catered to the apprentices' daily needs of clothing, food, shelter, and transportation. Ready-to-wear shops, restaurants, and even carriage services could be found in the living district. Numerous black towers dotted the landscape, where every wizard apprentice had their own private room with no rent required. Richard followed the owl for a whole day and finally completed a full tour of the academy. At the end, he caught sight of Ali among the newly arrived apprentices. "Hey! Richard! You really made it through." Ali looked a bit disheveled. Her originally beautiful blonde hair had been singed quite a bit by flames, and there was a charred scar on her forehead. Her clothes were somewhat tattered, but Richard was no better off in that aspect. It was quite normal to have your clothes torn by branches and thorns while walking through the forest. "I was a bit luckier, got here before you." Even though it had only been a few days since they last saw each other, seeing a familiar face in this strange academy was somehow comforting. As the sky darkened, plants resembling dandelions began sprouting beside the academy's pathways. The dandelions emitted a bright yet soft glow, illuminating the path like street lamps. Nightlight dandelions, a trophy from the Dean's conquest of another plane. They are used as street lamps in the academy during the night. As Richard walked, he introduced the general situation of the academy to Ali. Her group of apprentices had arrived right at dusk, and the owl, thinking that the new students needed rest, handed out items and left on its own. "So beautiful." Ali, looking at the dandelions, had a look of surprise and fascination in her eyes, overwhelmed by the scenery of the academy. Was this really the academy that seemed so murderous during the entrance exam? Shouldn't the grounds be filled with crosses, debris everywhere, students sitting on coffins in class, and teachers each as ferocious as demons? But remember not to touch them. If provoked, they will use their seeds as weapons. The blast from the seeds is not any weaker than the low-level fireball technique. Richard's words abruptly shattered Ollie's illusions. Richard pointed to a tower not far away. Over there is the living district. New apprentices have their own tower. Don't worry about not finding a room. The academy had a special area for newcomers to serve as a buffer. After the newcomers had been in the academy for 3 years, they would move out of the newcomer area to find new accommodation. As Richard headed toward the tower, he suddenly felt someone pulling at the hem of his clothes. Oh, then, let's be neighbors from now on. Allie was tugging on Richard's clothes, her hair falling to the side, covering her expression. Be neighbors. Richard didn't pay much attention to Ollie's reaction. The minds of young girls were like the summer's clouds and rain, unpredictable. Sure, the academy doesn't specifically separate male and female students. Really? That's great. Allie looked up suddenly, a hint of surprise in her eyes. Let's go, said Richard, pointing to the tower in the distance. Arriving early has its perks, no one to fight over rooms with. It's already so late, let's find a room we like and settle down for now. Chapter 15. The academy seemed even busier at night than during the day. On his way to the dormitory, Richard spotted 7 or 8 apprentices flying by. Could it be that the Wizard Academy also has classes at night? Richard wondered. When they arrived at the tower, 2 large door knockers were embedded in the thick door, with a metal lion head sculpture above it. Richard gently knocked on the door. Bang, bang, bang. Are they recruiting new students again? Above the door, the metal-carved lion's head suddenly began to speak. Ah, the statue is talking! Allie exclaimed. The lion's head paid no attention to Ollie's reaction. Little fellows, take out your crystal balls. Upon hearing this, Richard and Allie did as instructed, taking out a fist-sized crystal ball from the pocket provided by the owl. The quality of this crystal ball was much better than those used for the exam, with the entire sphere free of any impurities, smooth and translucent. As soon as Richard and Allie took out their crystal balls, the lion's head shot a red light into them, confirming their identities, and the door beneath it swung open. Apprentice Richard, Apprentice Allie, welcome to Life Tower Room number 012. Entering the tower, the first floor was empty, seemingly a large hall. A thick layer of dust had settled on the ground, indicating that this tower had not been entered for a long time. Following the stairs up, the second floor was quite different from the first, with a corridor spanning the floor, dividing it into 2 parts. Richard chose a sunny room, and Allie, as agreed, moved into the one next to his. Good night. Good night, Richard. The room wasn't small, about 30 square meters in size, with an ensuite bathroom, and all sorts of furniture were already in place. After cleaning the room and ensuring no furniture was termite-infested, Richard started to unpack his belongings. He hung the greatsword on the wall and neatly arranged the synthetic beast heart and an array of magic tools on the table. Lastly, he took out everything given by the owl. Besides the crystal ball, there was also a black robe, a rule book, a book on the basic meditation method, and 10 magic stones. Richard held the robe in his hands, and the long inactive miracle furnace suddenly trembled. This robe could be used as a material. Richard looked over the robe in surprise. It resembled silk and faintly pulsed with magic power. Richard probed with his spiritual power, and a rush of information entered his brain. Lucky apprentice, you have received a masterwork apprentice wizard robe handcrafted by alchemy master Yalad. This wizard robe is inscribed with a force field protection spell, breath concealment, and purifying filth spells, and it comes with auto-recharging circuits, an excellent choice for low-level apprentices to guard against assassination attempts. A twitch tugged at the corner of Richard's eyes. This alchemy master named Yalad seemed somewhat unorthodox. Yet, the message left behind brought Richard one piece of information. This wizard robe appeared to be a masterpiece, and perhaps the selection standard for the miracle furnace's materials was masterwork magic tools. Although this was his guess, with only this one example, Richard couldn't be sure. But the ability to refine was undoubtedly a good thing. Material, apprentice wizard robe. Refinable skills, magic engraving, incomplete. Refining cost, 15 spiritual power. Refinable information, force field protection spell model, breath concealing spell model, purifying filth magic model. Refining cost, 5 spiritual power. The information from the miracle furnace gave Richard a jolt. He hadn't expected a single wizard robe to potentially refine both skills and information. A magic engraving skill requires 15 spiritual power, while the 3 magic models only need 5. These spells must be 0-ring spells. Richard eyed the wizard robe, hesitant to refine it. The 3 0-ring spells were of little use to him, and the cost of refining the skill seemed likely to knock him unconscious. There's still some time before the entrance exams end, and there's nothing else to do right now. After some contemplation, Richard decided to refine the skill. Everything went dark, just as before, and Richard collapsed into unconsciousness on the spot. When he awoke again, it was already noon the following day. Was I out for that long? Richard looked at the glaring sunlight outside the bed window and slowly stood up. A white light jumped up and down above the miracle furnace, and as Richard absorbed it, he seemed to transform into a wizard. Magic power flowed through his hands like threads, combining with materials of unknown origin to inscribe spells upon his wizard robe. Phew! Richard suddenly came to his senses, then stared blankly at his own hands. The faint blue glow of magic power flickered at his fingertips, followed by the magic power turning into a thread that continuously extended from Richard's fingertips, forming a line of words in the air. Is this the skill of a wizard? Richard retracted the magic power. This skill seemed to open the door to a new world. He had never imagined that magic power could become a part of his body, as natural as moving an arm. It's incredible, this is still an incomplete skill. How powerful would it be if it was complete? In an instant, Richard felt the terrifying potential of a wizard. This was merely a part of one skill among the many that a wizard could master. If one possessed all the skills of a wizard, Richard dared not imagine how formidable such a wizard would be. Could he become a wizard like them? Richard dared not ponder any further. After washing up, he opened the academy regulations. The experience of the entrance exam had taught him that the books provided by the academy were definitely of use. After reading through the regulations from beginning to end, Richard's expression changed from relief to seriousness. The regulations of the academy were not strict, in fact, they could even be considered lenient. Many rules even served to prevent conflicts between apprentices. This contrasted greatly with its entrance exam. But all gifts were subtly marked with a price. Although the academy prevented conflicts among apprentices on a regular basis, every 10 years during the apprentice examinations, the apprentices would once again face the life-threatening challenges of the entrance exam. An apprentice who wanted to survive until the graduation exams had to endure at least 2 bloody tests. And if an apprentice made it to the graduation exams, they faced 2 choices, either to take part in the equally bloody graduation exams and compete for the qualification to become a wizard, or to graduate directly. After paying off 30 years of tuition fees, an apprentice could leave on their own. Yes, the Wizard Academy actually charged tuition. The cost of tuition was very high. If one did not become a wizard, an advanced wizard apprentice would have to work for the academy for at least 100 years to pay it off. Did the headmaster of this wizard academy come back from studying in Myanmar? Richard's face was grave as his earlier sense of relief vanished completely. The content of the regulations made him feel like a fishbone was stuck in his throat, uneasy, and on tenterhooks. Richard somewhat failed to understand what exactly the Wizard Academy was training. A killing machine? Putting down the regulations, Richard went downstairs and talked briefly with the Lionhead door knocker, inquiring about various matters of the academy. As part of the academy, the Lionhead door knocker was well versed in many rules and gave Richard a lot of constructive advice. For instance, the library of the academy was open to all apprentices, and many books were available for borrowing free of charge. The academy inspectors were fond of nuts and gemstones, and getting along with them could avoid punishment for minor infractions. Even a magic stone with residual magic power could be exchanged for academy coins, albeit one had to haggle and so on. These things seemed trivial, but if Richard had to discover them on his own, who knows how much time it would take. Thank you for your advice. I'll go to the commercial district and buy some alchemy ointment for you later. Richard gave a slight bow to the Lionhead door knocker and then turned towards the commercial district. The Lionhead door knocker's body was made of metal and, although it had been rust-proofed by the wizard who made it, years of exposure to wind and rain caused some rust to form. This was quite uncomfortable for the Lionhead door knocker. A bit of alchemy ointment for rust removal would easily alleviate this discomfort. The alchemy ointment was not expensive. Richard got a large bottle of rust-removing ointment for 25 academy coins. On his way back, he also picked up a few sets of clothes and a couple of pairs of leather shoes. After applying the ointment to the Lionhead door knocker, Richard returned to his room, took a bath, drank a bottle of nutritional potion, changed into new clothes, and then prepared to head to the library. Wizards pursue knowledge and respect it, so the library became the most sacred place in the academy. The librarian could ask any borrowing apprentice to leave if they showed disrespect to knowledge, and a good outfit could undoubtedly reduce a lot of trouble. Richard now had too many questions that needed answers. Chapter 16. The library was located on the 50th floor of the central Black Tower. Without the levitation skill, Richard had to walk all the way up from the first floor, and by the time he reached the 50th, his legs were so tired they were wobbling. Standing in front of the library door, Richard straightened his appearance, then strode in. The library was vast, countless shelves that soared 10 meters high spread out from before Richard's eyes to the horizon of his sight. Suddenly, a palm-sized, winged sprite appeared out of thin air in front of Richard. The sprite was very beautiful, and aside from the wings on its back, it looked like a proportionally shrunken beauty. The sprite fluttered around Richard in a circle. "You're a new student, aren't you? Quickly, take out your crystal ball." Upon hearing this, Richard took the crystal ball out from his bag. The sprite lightly touched the crystal ball, making it flash a faint glow. Armed with Richard's information, the sprite floated in front of him with an expression that was cute yet solemn. "New student Richard, I am Fenna, the library administrator. If you want to borrow books, then touch your crystal ball to the book number, and I will record your borrowings. Additionally, the library prohibits quarreling, loud noises, and the use of all spells other than the levitation skill. If you violate the rules, I will have you removed. If the situation is serious, I will prohibit you from entering the library. Got it? So how do I find the books I want?" The library's collection was vast as smoke. Without something like an index, Richard would have exhausted himself to death trying to find what he wanted. The sprite pointed at Richard's crystal ball. "I have already loaded all the books you're allowed to borrow into that. If you want more books, then increase your strength. Each time an apprentice advances a level, they can access more books. Once you become a wizard, you can borrow any book from the library." Richard probed the crystal ball with his spiritual power, and the information of one book after another instantly appeared before his eyes. "Any more questions?" Fenna asked. Richard snapped out of it, "Oh, no more, thank you. If there are no more questions, then I'll be going." Having said that, Fenna drew a glowing portal made of luminous powder in the air with her arm and then flew into it. Magical spell. Richard sighed, then began searching through the vast sea of books for the ones he wanted. Following the guidance of the information, Richard quickly located the book he was seeking, the Wizard World Almanac. Unlike the spell books that required magic stones to borrow, this book that introduced the wizard world could be borrowed without magic stones, and what Richard needed most now was to understand the wizard world. Finding a corner in the library, Richard sat down and began to lift the veil on the wizard world. The wizard world was much larger than Earth in his previous life, with nearly 1,000 wizard academies dotting the vast continents, each led by a wizard dean of at least 4th level great wizard status. The Gale Zone in the extreme east region, the Great Desert to the southwest, the magnetic island at the center of the continent, the sky-reaching ice wall at the edge of the world. As he flipped through the pages, a resplendent and magnificent wizard world gradually unfolded before Richard. However, as he read, Richard noticed that on the map of the wizard continent, there were areas of varying sizes marked as uninhabited. According to the map's legends, these places had no wizard academies, it did not even have ordinary people. What is going on here? Richard began searching the book for answers. Eventually, in the section that introduced the history of the wizard world, Richard found the answer. The history of the wizard world was divided into 3 stages: the Dark Age, the Age of Enlightenment, and the current Age of Exploration. During the Dark Age, wizards were lone warriors, carving out territories in the wilderness of knowledge on their own. In this period, wizards had not yet become the dominators of the wizard world, as both the colossal creatures of the sea and the giant dragons that soared the skies were far stronger than the wizards. The second stage was the Age of Enlightenment. Wizards began to unite during this phase, with wizards of similar research directions forming connections that eventually led to the creation of institutions and schools. Wizard families also rose during this period, with wizards intermarrying and solidifying their relationships through bloodlines and pacts. Also, during this period, wizards replaced the giant dragons as dominators of the land in the wizard world and reached an agreement with the giant beasts of the sea. At the end of the Age of Enlightenment, the wizard world had been fully explored by wizards, except for the seabed filled with magic power undercurrents and the elemental poles wreathed in elemental storms. The entire wizard world had been divided up by the wizards. The world was limited, but the number of wizards kept increasing. Under this nearly unsolvable problem, the Wizard Wars began. Wizards from various schools used all their lifelong knowledge to grind opposing wizards into dust. The shape-shifting school's elemental torrents disintegrated wizard towers, the undead school's multitude of undead was as numerous as grains of sand, the soul school summoned soul sea giant beasts one after another, the demon statue army of the alchemy school poured out continuously from the forges, and the curses of the mysterious school created countless invisible killers. This war turned a third of the wizard continent into wasteland, simultaneously creating an archipelago surrounding the continent. In the end, the leaders of the 5 major schools reached an agreement to end the war and formed the Truth Council to manage the entire wizard world. These 5 leaders were subsequently referred to as the Truth Wizards. Thus, the wizard world entered its third phase, the expansion era. War led to the loss of countless pieces of knowledge but also birthed many unprecedented new technologies. The maturity of star realm navigation technology allowed wizards to embark on interplanetary expeditions aboard floating cities, while the plane wars required a continuous influx of wizards to join the fray. The traditional family model produced wizards too slowly, often yielding only a few dozen over the course of centuries, which fell far short of the needs of the plane wars. Consequently, the Wizard Academy was established. Richard closed the book, now understanding the purpose behind the Academy's ruthless rules. So, essentially, all wizard academies are military institutions, and all the Academy wizards are born for the plane wars. Plane wars, star realm voyages. These notions electrified Richard's innermost being. In his previous life, Richard had been obsessed with stars, fantasizing about humanity coexisting in harmony and exploring the endless cosmos. Ironically, what he hadn't witnessed in his past life, he saw after transmigrating. I must become a wizard. Richard's gaze was resolute. Before, he had been living merely to survive. But now, he had a dream. When he left the library, night had already fallen. At the door of his dormitory, he encountered Allie, whose hair and burns had fully recovered, and she was donned in a new, form-fitting dress. The Academy had a hospital. From minor colds and fevers to severe mutilations, the Academy hospital could heal them all. They could even summon an undead wizard from the undead school to transform you into an undead wizard provided you had enough magic stones. Hey, Richard! Where have you been? Want to try some freshly baked bread? Allie greeted Richard with a bag of hot, fragrant baguettes, handing one to him. Richard accepted the bread, and the rich aroma instantly awakened his appetite. Gurgling. There seemed to be quite a few restaurants and bakeries in the living area. I was at the library just now. You should go too, there's a Wizard World Almanac that's quite interesting, Richard mumbled as he ate his bread. Okay, I'll check it out tomorrow. Allie looked at Richard, her cheeks reddening inexplicably. As the saying goes, clothes make the man, and Richard, now in new attire and having recovered from previous malnourishment, exuded a scholarly charm with his long black hair, handsome features, and slightly lean figure. All of this fell right into Ollie's perfect picture. Moreover, Richard had played the hero for her aboard the airship. Recalling the silhouette she glimpsed through the door crack, Ollie's cheeks couldn't help but feel hot. Make sure to look at the historical section, Richard instructed after swallowing his bite of bread, patting Allie with a determined look. Ollie's heart skipped a beat. Okay. I will definitely read it. Back in his room, Richard couldn't wait to pick up the book on the basic meditation method. One indispensable condition to become a wizard was spiritual power, and the meditation method was the most common and widely used means to enhance it. Ingredient: basic meditation method. Information that can be refined: basic meditation method. Refining cost: 10 spiritual power. Proceed with refining. Yes. Chapter 17. Richard, after distilling the basic meditation method, nearly fainted on the spot, but he managed to persist, using the basic meditation method to meditate. After his spiritual power had recovered, Richard began practicing the basic meditation method. Compared to the basic meditation method, the basic meditation method had 7 additional spiritual runes, which although allowed Richard to stay in the Sea of Souls for longer, also made the meditation twice as difficult. Richard failed many times but eventually, with a bit of luck, succeeded in constructing the 10 spiritual runes. The basic meditation method enabled Richard to linger in the Sea of Souls for 4 hours, twice the time afforded by the basic meditation method. But that extra time was not to be underestimated. The longer the soul stayed in the Sea of Souls, the more benefits it gained. Although it was only 2 additional hours, the increase in spiritual power was more than 6 hours of meditation with the basic meditation method. Meditation couldn't be done frequently in a short period, otherwise, the soul would risk becoming lost in the sea of souls, unable to return. Thus, after meditating, Richard chose to visit the library again. The Academy's library was open day and night, and even at night, many apprentices could still be seen heading to the library. There was much for Richard to learn, and what he did not lack now was time. The entrance exam soon came to an end. In just 10 days' time, over half of the nearly 10,000 apprentices who came for the exam had perished, and the rest had all entered the Academy. During this time, Richard, through the library's free books, had gained a general understanding of the wizard world's structure and various etiquettes. Under the effect of the basic meditation method, his spiritual power had successfully increased from 15 to 15.1. With the end of the entrance exams, the Academy's free courses were also made available. Each student was entitled to 4 free lessons a month. After the 4 free lessons, the remaining classes required a magic stone to attend. Each month for the first 3 years, the Academy would give out 1 magic stone, but to get more, apprentices had to complete campus tasks issued by the Academy or trade with other apprentices. New apprentices had a 3-year novitiate period during which the Academy wouldn't force tasks upon them. After the novitiate ended, the Academy would assess the apprentices. To stay in the Academy, an apprentice had to have inscribed at least 1 magic mark and reached a spiritual power of 20 points, thereby becoming a junior apprentice. Dong dong dong. The heavy sound of the bell echoed inside the Academy, signaling that it was now 8 o'clock in the morning. Even in this other world, Richard could not escape the fate of early morning classes. This class was an introduction to alchemy, Richard's first lesson. He was currently sitting in a tiered classroom on the 3rd floor of the central black tower, with Ali at his side, the entire classroom packed full. "Richard, why hasn't the teacher arrived yet?" Ali glanced at Richard's profile, her mind filled with myriad thoughts. It had been 6 days since they entered the Academy, and Richard was still indifferent to her, spending all day either in the library or meditating. The only time he went to the dining hall was when she had invited him. Did she really lack appeal? Maybe something has held them up. Richard answered absently as he flipped through the introduction to magic he had borrowed from the library. He was not concerned with Ali's emotions, he was immersed in the ocean of knowledge. The discussion of wizard spells in this introduction to magic captivated him. Elemental magic, soul magic, undead magic, and even curse magic, each had its own characteristics and uses. The book also introduced a concept called the combat system. A powerful wizard inevitably had their own combat system, relying on their core spells and supplementing them with minor spells suited to various situations to build their combat strategy, ensuring they could face any foe with calmness and confidence during plane wars and wizard duels. If he were to construct a combat system, it would surely need to thump, 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 thump. A series of footsteps approached from outside the classroom, growing nearer. The previously somewhat noisy room instantly fell silent. Bang! The classroom door was flung open, and in walked a tall, curvy beauty clad in a wizard robe with long hair and black leather boots. Her stunningly cold beauty was complemented by a pair of slender eyes that added a touch of mystery to her demeanor. A mysterious black cat. That was Richard's first impression of her. Stepping up to the podium, she quickly scrawled a line of large characters on the blackboard. "What is a wizard? Good day to all, I am Anna Dosi. I am an apprentice of Wizard Yalad from the Alchemy School. This class was originally supposed to be taught by my mentor, but as he is currently engaged in a critically important alchemy experiment at its crucial stage, I will be taking over the lesson," Anna said, her voice calm yet carrying an authority that demanded compliance. "So, can any of you tell me what a wizard is?" Anna, holding a pointer, scanned the entire classroom. Despite standing in a position lower than the students, everyone who looked at her felt as though she was looking down on them. "You, tell me," Anna pointed the pointer at an apprentice. I think a wizard is someone who can use magic," the called-up apprentice obviously hadn't prepared and gave a rather casual answer. "Very good, that is indeed a characteristic of a wizard. Any other opinions?" Anna waved her pointer, signaling him to sit down, then pointed at another pupil. "I think wizards are those who use magic power to change the world." Anna nodded, "That's also good, but it's still just surface level." Anna then pointed at several other apprentices in succession, but their answers clearly all satisfied her. Finally, Anna's pointer rested on Richard. "Apprentice, what do you think a wizard is?" Richard met Anna's eyes. This woman who had been full of confidence since the beginning of class was now watching him, her gaze so sharp it seemed to bore a hole right through him. Before him, all other apprentices had avoided her gaze, but Richard decided to meet it squarely. Richard took a deep breath and, looking directly at Anna, said slowly, "I believe wizards are a group of lunatics in pursuit of knowledge. Spells and magic power are essentially just byproducts of that pursuit." After Richard finished speaking, the classroom was deadly silent, with all students staring at him. His answer was a bit too outrageous. Magic power and spells were the hallmarks of a wizard, their vital means of livelihood. How could they possibly be mere byproducts? Very good. Anna motioned for Richard to sit down, then wrote his statement on the blackboard. Wizards are a group of lunatics in pursuit of knowledge. This statement is key to whether you can become wizards or not. My mentor told me this at the beginning, and now I am passing it on to you all. Anna's words sent a shock through all the students in the classroom. Wasn't the purpose of entering the Wizard Academy to become wizards? But how were they to understand this statement? Each apprentice had their own interpretation. Richard, watching Anna on the podium, knew that the statement he had made was not his own invention, but came from the ruler of the wizard world, the chairperson of the Truth Council. When he first encountered this statement, Richard just thought the chairperson was somewhat pretentious. "I'm just pursuing knowledge, magic power and spells are just things I created along the way, not worth mentioning, not worth mentioning." But hearing Anna say it today gave Richard a new understanding of the statement. Lunatics in pursuit of knowledge. If it's just about seeking knowledge, then why become a lunatic? Richard stared at the blackboard and raised his hand to write a sentence in his notes. Perhaps it's not that lunatics pursue knowledge, but that one must become a lunatic in the pursuit of knowledge. Chapter 18. Anna's class was fascinating, delving into the ancient art of alchemy with clarity and simplicity. The 2-hour session ended in the blink of an eye, and as soon as the time was up, Anna bustled out of the classroom just as hurriedly as she had arrived. Alchemy. This really goes well with the miracle furnace. Richard touched his chin, pondering over the chalkboard. Alchemy encompassed a wide range, with magic potions and magic equipment being the most well-known aspects. For these, formulas and a plethora of practice were required, and both were substantial magic stone burners. Magic equipment, commonly referred to by apprentices as magic tools, followed the same principle. Magic models and practice materials weren't significantly cheaper than the formulas and ingredients for the potions. But this wasn't a problem for Richard. Extensive practice could be compensated for through refining skills, and both potion formulas and magic models could be directly refined too. Moreover, according to Anna's account, although alchemy was costly, it could also be profitable. Her alchemy store in the Academy's commercial district brought her nearly 100 magic stones in profit each month. And that was when she hardly had the time to manage it. There should be books on alchemy in the library, I'll check them out later. As they left the classroom, Allie seemed eager to drag Richard to the commercial district, its prosperity seemingly igniting her inborn shopping enthusiasm. "No thanks, I'm heading to the library." Richard waved goodbye to Allie, who watched his retreating figure with a somewhat sullen stomp of her foot. Back in the library, the librarian Fenna was nowhere to be seen this time. Richard searched the crystal ball for books on alchemy and suddenly, a batch of books listed as unknown caught his attention. Unknown? That's interesting. He found the section holding the unknown books and noticed several apprentices picking through them. "Excuse me, senior, what are these unknown books about?" Richard asked a young-looking apprentice. "Oh, a freshman." The apprentice seemed surprised. "These books are the notes of wizards who died during the Wizard War. They're written in code, indecipherable to anyone but their authors. The dean has placed these notes here to see if any apprentices might chance to decode them." As she spoke, she gestured to the surrounding apprentices. "We're all trying our luck." "I see. Sorry to have disturbed you." Having gotten the answer, Richard's heart pounded excitedly. A bold idea struck him. He picked up a notebook, the symbols within completely different from the wizard language, but Richard didn't attempt to decipher it. Instead, he tried using the miracle furnace. Raw material, unknown wizard's notes. Extractable information, physique enhancement potion formula. Extraction cost, 25 spiritual power. Insufficient spiritual power. As expected, even this secret text can be extracted, Richard thought, suppressing the excitement within him. His gaze towards the bookshelf was like seeing a gold mine. He put the notebook back in its place and noted down the number. The spiritual power needed to extract from this particular notebook was currently beyond his reach, and he had to set it aside for the time being. But with so many notes, Richard believed there had to be at least one that he could refine right now. Raw material, unknown wizard's notes. Extractable information, 132 failed cases. Raw material, unknown wizard's notes. Extractable information, 342 diary entries. Material, notes of an unknown wizard. Extractable information, experiences from mating with 32 otherworld creatures. As Richard continued his exploration with the miracle furnace, his expression shifted from wild joy to a somewhat bemused resignation. What is it with these wizards and noting down everything? Richard rather angrily put the notes on mating experiences back in their place and then took note of their identification number. Ahem, don't overthink it. Richard was simply interested in the anatomical structure of otherworld creatures. After searching the bookshelf for quite a while, Richard finally found a set of notes he could extract information from. Material, notes of an unknown wizard. Extractable part, bloodline alchemy recipe. Extraction cost, 15 spiritual power. Proceed with extraction. No. Richard pressed the crystal ball against the book's identification tag, and with a flash of white light, a line of text appeared within the crystal ball. Wizard Apprentice Richard has borrowed book number N7891, borrow time 3 days, please return to the library to renew the loan after expiration. This book is free and allowed to be recorded. Free books can be recorded, so books that need magic stones definitely can't be. Richard stroked his chin. I wonder what method the Academy uses to prevent paid books from leaking out. Could it be a curse? However, Richard didn't dwell on it, as he was someone who abided by the rules. Returning to his dormitory with the notes, Richard chose to extract from them. Another familiar blackout ensued, and by the time Richard awoke, the sky had already darkened. Let's see what this bloodline alchemy is about. Richard absorbed the white light, thereby learning the reality of bloodline alchemy. To fuse the bloodline of other creatures into one's own body, to be used at crucial moments to gain abilities or strength. And it's not just one type of creature, the bloodline alchemy can actually combine multiple creatures' bloodlines together, achieving an effect where 1 + 1 exceeds 2. Richard glanced at the notes before him and suddenly thought of Sabin, whom he had killed. Sabin's case seemed somewhat similar to bloodline alchemy. Could it be that the legendary knights from the legends were wizards or even wizard apprentices who used bloodline alchemy? With this in mind, Richard hastily retrieved Sabin's arm bracelet. Comparing the content on the arm bracelet with the information in the notes, the rhythm of breathing recorded on the arm bracelet was very similar to that in the notes, where such rhythm was referred as the breathing technique, a method used in the first stage of bloodline alchemy to stimulate the bloodline. Recalling Sabin exhaling white chi from his mouth and nose, Richard slapped his thigh. Exactly. The essence of legendary knights is bloodline alchemy. The legendary knights depicted as enormously strong with various special abilities are nothing but wizards or even wizard apprentices who have used bloodline alchemy. This discovery made Richard's pulse race. He became impatient and took the notes straight to the Academy library. Introduction to Alchemy, Ancient Alchemy, on the strengths and weaknesses of bloodline alchemy. Book after book about alchemy was found by Richard, who now had a concept forming in his mind. He wanted to construct a comprehensive combat system centered around alchemy. A wizard's means are ever-changing. If these means were imagined as a deck of cards, then each card would have a corresponding counter. Richard's idea was to rely on alchemy as the core card to build his own deck. What he was doing now was determining whether alchemy was up to this significant task. As he flipped through each book, various information about alchemy was absorbed by Richard, and his understanding of alchemy became increasingly comprehensive. His idea of constructing a combat system based around alchemy also solidified. Magic equipment, magic potions, bloodline alchemy, magic arrays. Alchemy covered a vast array of subjects, both broad and deep enough to serve as the core of a combat system. After going through all the borrowed books, Richard let out a sigh. A combat system outline, centralized on alchemy and supplemented by various spells, began taking shape in his mind. What he needed to do now was expand his knowledge to fill in the details of this outline. But before that, there was something else he needed to complete. That was to find a mentor from whom he could learn alchemy. Chapter 19. Wizard Academy had no strict requirements for apprentices in choosing mentors, or rather, many wizards simply didn't want to take on apprentices. For the majority of wizards, an apprentice would only distract them. Richard had spent a long time in the mentor section of the central Black Tower, filtering out all the mentors renowned for their alchemy. After eliminating the wizards who hadn't taken apprentices for many years and those with extremely demanding conditions, a wizard named Yalad caught his attention. Alchemy School Yalad, second-level wizard, main research focus on alchemy, has taken in 1,300 apprentices over the past 100 years. Richard looked at Yalad's information and felt the name seemed familiar. Isn't this Anna's mentor and the wizard who made my wizard robe? Recalling Anna's commanding presence on the podium and the techniques he had extracted from his wizard robe, Richard was certain that this wizard Yalad must be a master. Let me see what the conditions for apprentices are: strength to be at the lower apprentice level, and at least complete one task he has posted. Richard stroked his chin. These conditions do seem easy, no wonder he manages to take on over 100 apprentices each session. But as easy as they were, Richard hadn't met either condition. Becoming a lower-level apprentice would probably take a year. Let's first see the tasks he has posted. Arriving on the 25th floor of the central Black Tower, this was the Academy Task Hall where apprentices could freely take on tasks posted by the Academy. Richard walked into the hall. The vast hall was divided into 3 parts. On the far left were the Academy's daily tasks, which mainly involved maintaining Academy equipment and patrolling corners of the Academy and cities and mountains within the Academy's sphere of influence. These were tasks with extremely low difficulty and likewise low benefits. On the far right side of the hall, the posted tasks were trial tasks, primarily involving hunting magic beasts and investigating dangerous incidents within the Academy's sphere of influence. These tasks were extremely dangerous but also offered great benefits. In between these two, which was the area most populated by apprentices, were tasks posted by the Academy's wizards. These tasks ranged from collecting herbs to concocting magic potions and could be described as having moderate difficulty, some inherent risk, but equally substantial rewards. Richard approached the middle area and suddenly noticed that his crystal ball lit up by itself. Using his spiritual power to probe, he found that he could see all the tasks posted by wizards on his crystal ball. Impressive! Richard exclaimed softly, starting to look for a task posted by Wizard Yalad. After searching for a while, a task for refining 50 grams of red mercury appeared in front of him. Red mercury, a volatile liquid metal, apprentices are advised to carefully consider their own strength before taking on this task. If extraction is completed, please submit it to the 50th floor of the central Black Tower. Reward: 100 magic stones. Richard looked at the task description, equating this item with nitroglycerin in his mind. But this task has no time limit. I'll take it first and see. Besides, the miracle furnace can also refine materials. This time is a good opportunity to test its efficacy. Richard walked up to the counter, and a Medusa-like witch with serpentine hair greeted him. Richard glanced at the silver pentagram symbol on the witch's wizard robe. At Black Tower Wizard Academy, the silver pentagram was the mark of an apprentice. Miss, I would like to take on task 1205. The witch glanced at him. Young man, a newcomer, aren't you? Yalad's tasks aren't so easily taken. Miss, what do you mean by that? Are Master Yalad's tasks always very difficult? Richard smiled, trying to leverage his looks to his advantage. The Medusa-like witch gave Richard a cursory glance, the corners of her mouth hinting at an amused smile. Don't try to butter me up. But even though she said so, the Medusa-like witch still told Richard about Yalad. Yalad's tasks are notoriously thankless and strenuous. Don't be fooled by his recruitment of over 100 apprentices each session, very few actually receive his personal guidance. This I didn't expect. Richard was taken aback. Then why does he recruit so many apprentices? What else, to work for him? The Medusa-like witch twiddled her fingers. He owns an alchemy workshop, and most of the apprentices he recruits end up working there. I advise you, unless you have considerable talent in alchemy, to avoid working under Yalad. After considering for a moment, Richard thought about how few wizards specialized in alchemy at the Academy and how every other alchemy wizard had extremely stringent conditions for their apprentices. If he gave up on Yalad, he might never be able to pursue the path of an alchemy wizard. Moreover, since the task had no time limit and offered a rich reward, even if he didn't choose Yalad as his mentor, just earning some magic stones would be worthwhile. Thank you for the advice, miss, but I think I have a bit of talent in alchemy. I'll take this task. The Medusa-like witch was not at all surprised by Richard's response. Over the years, she had seen too many wizards like Richard. Every one of them believed they were extraordinarily talented and thought they could win the favor of a wizard. But in the end, only a handful truly succeeded. Another who won't take advice, such a waste of a handsome face. Give me your crystal ball, I'll register your information. After leaving the task hall, Richard immediately headed towards the commercial district. To refine red mercury, a material known as sunstone was required. This material was quite rare, so much so that Richard had a hard time finding it in the shops of the commercial district. Eventually, Richard learned about an alchemy shop named Anna's Hut that sold this material. Anna's Hut, it can't be that Anna owns it, can it? Richard smirked twitchingly as he looked at the shop name. A mentor's task, and the materials had to be bought from his apprentice's store. This wizard Yalad truly was a shrewd businessman. It seemed that Anna's Hut often dealt with apprentices taking on Yalad's tasks. When Richard explained his purpose, the shopkeeper immediately handed him a bag. 2 kilograms of sunstone, sufficient to extract 50 grams of red mercury. The price is 500 academy coins. The price startled Richard. It was too cheap compared to the reward. This kind of business, aside from being a scam, made Richard think that the extraction of red mercury was very likely to fail, necessitating repeated purchases of sunstone. All right, here are the magic stones. Richard took the bag, feeling somewhat heavy-hearted. Magic stones -5, he had 5 left. Back in his room, Richard reviewed the information in the crystal ball about the extraction of red mercury. After confirming that refining red mercury did not require sunstone to be mixed with other materials, Richard took a deep breath and took out a piece of sunstone. Material, sunstone, 1 kilogram. Refinable substance, red mercury. Refining cost, 100 magic power. Proceed with refining. Chapter 20. Haha, this kind of thing that doesn't involve synthesis and only requires impurity removal can indeed be done using the miracle furnace. Richard slapped his thigh, the whole person becoming excited. For a long time, Richard had been using the miracle furnace to refine various pieces of information, and he hadn't used its function to refine materials. Now, having accepted the task of extracting red mercury, he was keen to see the capability of the miracle furnace in extracting materials. No. But Richard didn't rush to refine, he remembered the explosive nature of red mercury. Red mercury is prone to explosion, it must be kept away from light after refining, and be safe from bumps and shakes. I need to buy a colored glass bottle. No sooner said than done, Richard immediately went to the business district and bought a brown glass bottle. Once back in his room, Richard took a fist-sized sunstone into his hands and chose to refine. The next moment, Richard felt his magic power flowing towards a place he could not detect. Refining consumed 2/3 of Richard's magic power, which meant that 1 unit of spiritual power was equivalent to 10 units of magic power. As the magic power dwindled, the sunstone in Richard's hand instantly appeared in the melter, shrinking rapidly before his eyes, turning into a lump of golden, red liquid that appeared in Richard's hand. Wrapped in magic power, the red mercury floated motionless in the air. Richard opened the newly purchased brown glass bottle and carefully guided the red mercury into the bottle with his magic power. After all of it had entered the glass bottle, Richard brought over a large balance to weigh it. A kilogram of sunstone had actually yielded 50 grams of red mercury. Have I been duped? Richard was somewhat angry, but then he thought that thanks to the miracle furnace extraction, there was almost no loss. Ordinary apprentices could not use the materials as completely as he did. So, it was understandable that 1 kilogram of sunstone could be refined into 50 grams of red mercury. Regardless, the task is completed. Even if I don't join Yalad, 100 magic stones is a significant sum. After refining the red mercury, Richard's life returned to normal. Central Black Tower, library, dormitory, these 3 points made a straight line. Occasionally, he would join Ali for a meal and stroll through the commercial district. That was the entirety of Richard's life. As for the task, Richard didn't go to submit it. According to his experiments with the remaining sunstone, it would take at least a month for an ordinary apprentice to refine red mercury, and that was if everything went well and without mistakes. If there was a failure, the time could double or even more. The tree that stands out in the forest is the one that gets cut down. Moreover, Richard was not just excellent, he had an external help. Under these circumstances, Richard had to conceal his true power and set the time for submitting the task to 3 months after accepting it. Apart from the task, during this time, Richard had been seeking materials for bloodline alchemy rather than exchanging for magic models to inscribe magic marks. There are 3 essentials for a wizard apprentice: connecting to the Sea of Souls, establishing magic rebound, and inscribing magic marks. Inscribing magic marks allows a wizard to cast spells quickly, but as a low-level apprentice, Richard had very few spells he could exchange for now. Bloodline alchemy was different. The formula Richard had extracted from those notes was called Black Knight, the first 3 stages of which could be undertaken during the apprenticeship phase, and the required bloodlines were not rare. The simplest first stage only needed a bloodline from a low-level magic beast called Black Iron Beast. The fight with Sabin had shown him how powerful a knight could become with the help of spells. And the purpose of bloodline alchemy was to enhance his physique. Richard was clear that their current peaceful life was merely because they had just entered the academy and were unfamiliar with many things. As time passed, conflicts were sure to erupt among this group who had blood on their hands. 3 months later, in the apprentice self-assessment room. Spiritual power 16.2, physique 10, magic power 162, rating, entry-level apprentice. Looking at the data displayed in the crystal ball, Richard nodded in satisfaction. After 3 months of grueling meditation, his spiritual power had finally broken through 16 points. 3 months to increase by 1 point, with this speed, I'll reach the standard of a low-level apprentice in a year. And this is the speed without changing the meditation method. If I can replace it with an intermediate meditation method, this pace will be even faster. He also noticed his physique. According to the Academy's records, a knight attendant's physique ranges between 10 to 15 points, with 15 being a formal knight, and surpassing 20 being a senior knight. Richard had managed to elevate his physique to the level of a knight attendant, without any physical training whatsoever. This was simply inconceivable. If Ali from next door hadn't experienced the same thing, he would have doubted whether he had some legendary bloodline. After leaving the testing room, Richard headed to the street of market stalls in the commercial district. On this street, there were market stalls set up by apprentices who couldn't afford a shop. Richard had no particular reason for his visit, purely because the prices here were cheap, suitable for finding bargains. Looking left and right, Richard strolled around and actually spotted something he needed. "Friend, how much for this claw?" Richard squatted in front of a market stall, looking at a claw on the stall that had a few black scales attached. After many days of searching, Richard had finally found someone selling a black iron beast. The stall owner glanced at Richard, his brand new wizard robe, his youthful face. It seemed he was a new apprentice, perfect for a good rip-off. 500 academy coins, the stall owner quoted the price. With such poor quality, how dare you ask for the price of 5 magic stones? Richard pointed at the claw and raised his voice in surprise. This is at most 200 academy coins, no more. 200. The stall owner nearly jumped up from the ground upon hearing Richard's offer. He was here to rip off some clueless person, not to be the clueless one. Why don't you go rob someone? Do you know how hard it is to kill a black iron beast? At least 4 magic stones. 4 magic stones? Why don't you go rob someone? Richard argued stubbornly, pointing out the defects on the claw and raising his voice. The claws of this black iron beast are all broken, and half of the metal scales on the skin have fallen off. 250 at most, no more. 350. That's the lowest I'll go. 300. Any higher and I'll look somewhere else. Richard, feigning to leave, saw the stall owner's resolute attitude and bit the bullet, agreeing to Richard's price. The claw had been laid out for 3 days now, and if it was not sold soon, it would rot, and the stall owner would be the one left holding the bag. Seeing the stall owner gritting his teeth, Richard chuckled merrily, tossed down 3 magic stones, picked up the item, and left with a flourish. Humming a tune, Richard carried the claw of the black iron beast back to his dorm. Although the claw of the black iron beast was poor in appearance, it was intended to be used as alchemy materials. Richard didn't buy it to make props. With this claw of the black iron beast, the first part of the bloodline alchemy in my notes can be completed. Chapter 21. Richard pressed down on the black iron beast's paw, and the miracle furnace within his soul instantly evaluated it. Ingredient: black iron beast's forepaw. Extractable material: pure black iron beast bloodline. Extraction cost: 100 magic power. Proceed with consumption. Yes. The black iron beast's forepaw instantaneously appeared in the miracle furnace. Streams of magic power were absorbed by the furnace, transforming into the driving force for the extraction. In mere seconds, a globule of blood, wrapped in magic power and shining like a ruby, appeared in Richard's hand. Bloodline alchemy, as a widely known alchemy among wizards, could merge the bloodlines of other creatures with the alchemist's own bloodline, ultimately granting certain abilities or enhancing one's physique. In bloodline alchemy, the purity of the bloodline was of utmost importance. If the blood used in bloodline alchemy were mixed with the bloodline of another creature, the end result would not be ideal, and could even greatly deviate from the original intent. Placing the blood into a test tube, Richard took out a bottle of deep black ink from a drawer. According to the records, in addition to purifying the bloodline alchemy also required the special ink to draw an alchemy array on the heart area. With the power of the array, Richard's body would convert the bloodline into a bloodline seed buried deep within the heart, to be activated when needed. This was indeed one of the most well-known paths in bloodline alchemy, the bloodline seed. The greatest advantage of this path was that it caused minimal physical alteration, and the bloodline was easily interchangeable. However, the downside was that using the bloodline required constant maintenance with magic power. Apart from this path, bloodline alchemy had other routes such as direct transplant of organ glands, transformative paths of mutating one's own organs, and the most popular amongst wizard communities, the direct blending of bloodlines. Add latest chapters at freeognovlo only. The notebook attentively recorded the formula for the ink, but after Richard made some inquiries, he discovered that bloodline alchemy ink was now available for direct purchase in stores, and the price was not particularly expensive, just 5 magic stones per bottle. Upon learning this, Richard could only sigh that the times were advancing, and technology was progressing. With the conquest of planes, the number of mergeable bloodlines had vastly increased, allowing wizards from various schools to find bloodlines that were suitable for their own and to engage in bloodline alchemy. The wizard who died during the Wizard Wars could have never imagined in his wildest dreams that the bloodline alchemy he researched would become a common technique among the wizard community. Holding a feather pen, Richard took off his shirt and found a mirror to draw the array on his chest. The alchemy array needed for bloodline alchemy was relatively simple, and Richard finished it in just 10 minutes. After completing the preparations, Richard took a deep breath and lay flat on the bed. The alchemy array lit up with a ghostly blue glow under the influence of magic power, and Richard poured the blood from the test tube into the center of the array. The next second, a sensation like being scorched by a red-hot iron branded his chest, and scalding blood pumped from his heart, coursing through his veins and throughout his body. Ugh! Richard clenched his teeth hard, striving to remain conscious. He now needed to ensure a constant supply of magic power into the alchemy array. After an indeterminate amount of time, Richard felt the burning sensation in his chest subside. He relaxed his body, lying on the bed as limp as mud, his clothing completely soaked with sweat. This thing is practically torture. After resting for a while and regaining some strength, Richard got up from the bed, casually stripped off his clothes, and decided to take a bath. SSSST. A ripping sound ensued. Richard looked at his torn trousers, his expression somewhat puzzled. He hadn't exerted much strength at all. He carefully tugged at his trousers and saw that the previously sturdy fabric tore as easily as paper in his hands. Richard finally realized what had happened. His strength had increased. He carefully removed his trousers to check on his body. A single punch thrown into the air produced an instant dull thud, and a light hop easily brought his head into contact with the ceiling. The notes mentioned that the first phase of bloodline alchemy would slightly enhance one's physique. Richard turned and lifted the bed behind him. It must have weighed several hundred pounds, yet he felt it was only slightly heavy. Is this what the wizard calls a slight enhancement of physique? Richard set down the bed, at a loss for words. Although he had anticipated that the wizard's idea of slight might differ from his, the current gap between wizard and apprentice seemed to be greater than that between heaven and earth. Adapting to his new body, Richard began to breathe according to the breathing technique outlined in the notes. Each bloodline alchemy came with its matching breathing technique, which not only temporarily increased combat strength but, most importantly, stimulated the body to awaken the bloodline. According to the notes, he should now have a protective layer of scale armor. Inhale, exhale. After breathing rhythmically for a few seconds, Richard felt a scorching hot stream originate at his heart and rapidly spread throughout his body. At the same time, an itchy sensation emerged from all over his body. Looking down at himself, he saw black scales with a metallic sheen breaking through his skin, looking just like those of a black iron beast. Richard fetched a dagger and tentatively prodded his scales. The dagger, which could usually slice through iron like mud, required a significant effort to penetrate his scales. Slight protection. Richard put away the dagger. Even when imbued with magic power, it could pierce plate armor, but now it took effort to pierce his scale armor. This meant he now wore armor better than plate armor. Black scales combined with the wizard robe's force field barrier, this level of defense was definitely top tier among the new apprentices. With my current state, I could easily defeat that magic sheep if I faced it head-on. The black scales undulated like flowing water with the movement of his muscles, casting an eerie charm under the light. How beautiful, Richard commented somewhat narcissistically. However, not long after, a horrifying hunger suddenly surged from within him. Damn it, bloodline alchemy drained my magic power, and now using my bloodline is consuming my life energy. Richard quickly suppressed his bloodline. The black scales began to recede from the tips of his limbs until they converged on his chest, forming a black imprint. Following the retreat of his bloodline, a wave of weakness immediately overtook him. Staggering to a table, Richard grabbed a leftover nutritional potion from the entrance exam and gulped it down. One bottle was not enough, then another, and after downing 3 bottles, the ghastly hunger finally subsided. Walking into the washroom, Richard looked at his gaunt reflection in the mirror and thought about how his recent weight gain had been for naught. This consumption from bloodline alchemy is too terrifying. Unless absolutely necessary, it should never be used when magic power is depleted, Richard concluded. After cleaning the blood caused by his emerging scales and changing into fresh clothes, Richard acknowledged that 3 months had passed. It was time to collect those 100 magic stones. Chapter 22. After tidying up his clothes, Richard cautiously took out the red mercury he had refined a few months ago and placed it into a box stuffed with balls of paper and straw. If this thing exploded, Richard could lose half his life. Carrying the box, he made his way to the central black tower, and while passing the apprentice self-test room, Richard decided to test his physique on the way. Spiritual power? Physique 22, magic power 176, rating, novice apprentice. Hey? Why is the spiritual power a question mark? Is the crystal ball broken? Richard tapped the crystal ball and, besides the spiritual power, his magic power also seemed off. However, since the bloodline in bloodline alchemy was from a magic beast, and the bloodline included some magic power, it wasn't a problem for the magic power to be a bit higher. By the time he reached the 56th floor, Richard was already sweating profusely. Carrying what was essentially a bomb, he would be lying if he said he wasn't nervous. Knock, knock, knock. Richard knocked on the nearest door. Click. What do you want? An apprentice opened the door. A portly figure, seemingly middle-aged, with slit eyes, a hooked nose, and a glossy forehead that shone under the magic light. Senior, I'm here to submit a task. Richard, holding the box, carefully handed it over to the middle-aged apprentice before him. Submitting a task? Which task? The middle-aged apprentice reached out to take it, but then, seeing Richard's sweat-drenched face and his cautious handling, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. It couldn't be red mercury. There really was a brash youth who had refined it. Please come in, quickly. Be careful with that box, the power of red mercury is not insignificant. The middle-aged apprentice kept retreating, then opened the door behind him as far as possible, making no move to take the box. Only after Richard had securely placed the red mercury did he breathe a sigh of relief. Junior brother, you're quite bold. Carrying red mercury all by yourself up here. The middle-aged apprentice sat down on a chair, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Senior, how may I address you? Chax. And your name? Richard. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Chax walked over to the window and called out twice. In seconds, a regular-sized owl flew into the room. Sister, someone has brought the red mercury you asked for, Chax said to the owl. Richard watched with curiosity. Senior, what is this? Chax waved his hand dismissively. It's just a small trick. I'm simply using animals to send messages. After saying this, he let the owl fly away and returned to his chair. Senior Chax, you just mentioned a sister. Isn't Master Yalad the one who wants the red mercury? Richard remembered Chax's words, realizing that perhaps the task for the red mercury wasn't directly set by Yalad himself. Ah, the teacher researches synthetic beasts, he doesn't need this stuff. Chax wiped his forehead again. The task for red mercury was posted in his name by senior sister Anna. So does this task count or? It counts. If you want to become a disciple of the teacher, this task definitely counts. Seeing Richard's somewhat bewildered face, Chax had a ridiculous thought cross his mind. He didn't refine red mercury without failing, did he? How could the refining of red mercury be fail-proof? Richard, how long did it take you to extract this stuff? Chax ventured to ask. About 3 months. Refining red mercury is quite dangerous, I failed a few times, so it took me a little longer, Richard lied convincingly. That's good, that's good. Given your strength, you must be a rookie who has just started school. I almost thought I had encountered a legendary alchemy prodigy, Chax said with a relieved laugh. Even the teacher sometimes fails when refining red mercury, the difficulty is off the charts. After hearing this, Richard immediately felt that his decision to submit the task after 3 months was absolutely correct. If a wizard has problems refining red mercury, what about an apprentice? The two chatted casually for a bit longer, and though Chax appeared greasy like a middle-aged man, his abilities were approaching an advanced apprentice, making him a formal student of Yalad. After getting to know each other better, Richard began to ask about becoming Yalad's disciple. Senior brother, I heard that most of those who join Master Yalad's tutelage end up in the alchemy workshop, Richard probed. Hearing this, Chax disdainfully waved his hand. Don't listen to the nonsense outside, that all the teacher's apprentices end up working in the alchemy workshop and don't learn anything real. I'm telling you, the treatment wizard gives to his apprentices is counted among the best in the entire academy. As long as you join wizard as a disciple, you'll get a subsidy of at least 5 magic stones every month. And that's on top of your workshop salary. If you work in the workshop, it's normal to make 10 or 20 magic stones a month after you get skilled. For you newcomers, isn't that much better than doing academy tasks? After speaking, Chax reached into the table beside him and pulled out a metal flask, taking a couple of sips. Besides, just look at how other masters treat their apprentices. Using them to test medicines, to experiment with magic, I have personally seen all this. Our mentor doesn't even talk about experimenting on you, and he even gives you magic stones. Where else are you going to find such a good deal? The more Richard listened, the more he felt something was off, as Chax's words sounded suspiciously like some kind of scam. If Yalad was that good, apprentices would be breaking down the doors to join him. But before Richard could speak, the door to the room banged open. Chax, where's the stuff you brought? Richard looked up to see that the person who entered was Anna, the one who had lectured him the other day. Seeing Anna, Chax immediately hid his flask, then jumped to his feet and scurried over to her, fawningly saying, Sister, sister, the red mercury is over there. Don't make such a fuss, red mercury can't withstand you treating it that roughly. Anna glanced at Chax and then turned to look at the box before looking over at Richard. Did you refine this? I refined it. After confirming it was the apprentice's work, Anna walked briskly over to the box where the red mercury was kept and gently opened it. Upon opening the box, she was greeted by the sight of a brown glass bottle. Although many apprentices knew red mercury needed to be kept away from light, using a brown glass bottle for its storage was a detail she had only thought of after her mentor's guidance. She had never seen anyone else use it before. A brown glass bottle, good attention to detail, Anna praised. Chax overheard Anna's words and nearly popped his eyeballs out in excitement. Sister Anna was praising someone. Anna was Yalad's most prized disciple over the last 1,000 years. Normally, instead of praise, it was good enough if she didn't scold her fellow disciples and siblings. As for praise, that was unheard of. They should be kept away from light, so I found a brown bottle, Richard muttered vaguely. When he opened the bottle, a peculiar scent of evaporating red mercury instantly spread through the room. Richard instinctively covered his mouth and nose, but saw Anna wave her hand, and a breeze cleared the smell from the room through the window. Chax, as a disciple of the mentor, even an outsider knows to cover their nose and mouth, and you're still standing there dumbfounded, Anna said, her glance making Chax shiver. After addressing Chax, Anna's fingertips sparked with a pale blue light, and a thread of magic power emanated from her fingertip, deftly entering the bottle. After a moment, a droplet of red mercury with a strange color was drawn out by her. This color. Anna looked at the color of the red mercury, her eyes flickering uncertainly. This color, this shimmer, this was indeed red mercury, and it was red mercury of extremely high purity. Unable to resist, Anna stimulated the red mercury, and with a bang, the red mercury exploded upon the stimulus of magic, creating a gust of air in the room. Did you refine this? Anna turned and asked. I refined it, Richard replied. What's your name, do you have a mentor? I am Richard, and I currently do not have a mentor. That's good. After listening, Anna capped the bottle and walked over to Richard. Richard was somewhat confused. Had the miracle furnace not refined red mercury? Did this woman think he was a fraud? Her question about having a mentor, was it asking if he had any backing? Suddenly, Richard remembered that the 50 floors above in the central Black Tower were the domains of wizards, where there were no academy inspectors. That is, if Anna killed him here, nobody would know. For a moment, Richard's mind was in disarray, and he kept stepping back. Look, Sister Anna. Cornered with no escape, Richard, having no other choice, braced himself and said, just say what you want to do. Anna, towering nearly 6 feet tall, was able to look down at Richard. She patted his shoulders with both hands, her voice firm as she said. If you don't have a mentor yet, then join our alchemy school. Chapter 23. Anna's words left Richard somewhat at a loss. I came here to submit a task, why are you trying to rope me in? Join the alchemy school, you have a strong talent in alchemy. This bottle of red mercury, even my mentor would struggle to achieve your level of purity, you're definitely a talent in alchemy. Anna spoke with a righteous tone, and Richard almost believed her. But senior, I'm still a beginner apprentice and the minimum requirement for Master Yalad's disciples is an intermediate apprentice. Beginner apprentice. Anna looked at Richard and suddenly frowned, a strong surge of spiritual power swept over him momentarily. That's impossible, you've already reached the standard of an intermediate apprentice. What? When Richard heard Anna's words, he was momentarily stunned. He had only recently reached a spiritual power of 16, still 4 points shy of the requirement for an intermediate apprentice. How could he have possibly become one overnight? Seeing Richard's perplexed expression, Anna shook her head, maybe you did something that stimulated the growth of your spiritual power. Did something? Richard pondered for a while, the only special thing he had done recently was bloodline alchemy. Could bloodline alchemy also enhance spiritual power? While Richard was pondering, Chax suddenly spoke up from the side. It's probably the rebound effect. Richard, have you been practicing bloodline alchemy recently? Hearing Chax's words, Anna also noticed the incongruity in Richard's physiology. Although he had adapted to his rapidly advancing physique, there were still some minor discrepancies due to such a short adaptation period. That's indeed the case. Then it's not surprising, Chax said with a knowing look. Senior Chax, what is this rebound effect? It seems you haven't attended the Soul School's classes yet. Chax smiled, a flash of wisdom glinting across his shiny forehead. According to the research of the Soul School, our soul and body are not completely separated. There exists a covered connection between them. This connection can balance the disparity between the body and the spirit. When a creature's physique surges, its spiritual power increases as well, allowing its soul to utilize the body. The same goes the other way around, when spiritual power surges, the creature's physique also increases, enabling the body to accommodate a stronger soul. Though Chax usually appeared like a greasy middle-aged man, when he discussed theories, his entire demeanor changed, and his previously somewhat comical shiny forehead now became a symbol of maturity and reliability. Simply put, if either spiritual power or the body is too strong, it will promote the growth of the other. After you practiced bloodline alchemy, your physique reached the level of an intermediate apprentice, but there was a significant disparity with your spiritual power, so your spiritual power also increased. Having heard this, Richard suddenly understood. So that's how it is. Then, wouldn't it be possible for a knight's spiritual power to be enhanced if their physique is powerful enough? In theory, yes, Chax nodded, but the physiological limit of human beings is too low. Even if they reach the so-called peak to become a high-level knight, it's merely 29 points of physique. Compared to a wizard's meditation, this method of enhancing strength is far too inefficient. Apprentice, how long did your session of bloodline alchemy take? Just an hour or two, and you achieved what some knights take decades to accomplish. Moreover, spiritual power must connect to the Sea of Souls to be completely liberated. If a knight does not reach high level, the spiritual power gained through the rebound effect would merely be potential. Richard thought about it, and indeed, what Chax had said was true. Apprentice, don't think about relying on physique to boost spiritual power. The rebound effect requires a significant difference between spiritual power and physique, such as your current situation where your spiritual power is at an intermediate apprentice, but your physique has reached the standard of an intermediate apprentice. Only in such situations will the rebound effect occur. If you become a wizard, this effect would change between a one-ring wizard and a second-ring wizard. As he spoke, Chax suddenly walked up to Richard and patted his shoulder. Our mentor has connections with many alchemy wizards. As long as you can become the mentor's formal disciple, later transforming your current bloodline to a more perfect bloodline formula is not impossible. Obviously, Chax had mistaken Richard for an apprentice who conducted bloodline alchemy recklessly. Richard forced a smile upon hearing this, silently vowing to himself that he would definitely add a twist to the materials refined in the miracle furnace in the future. All right, Chax, step aside for now, whether you enter the alchemy school depends on what Richard wants. Anna pulled Chax aside, leaving Richard alone to ponder quietly. Choosing a mentor was a serious matter, with the academy having strict rules about switching mentors. If an apprentice rashly changed mentors, it could lead to a situation where no mentors in the academy were willing to accept them. Minutes later, Richard took a deep breath and looked steadfastly at Anna. I've made up my mind. I want to join the alchemy school and become a disciple under Master Yalad. Good, I will take you to meet the mentor right now. Anna clapped her hands, immediately dragging Richard up to the upper levels of the Black Tower. On the 99th floor of the central Black Tower, the alchemy wizard Yalad was busily engaged in his synthetic beast experiment. As the Black Tower Wizard Academy's wizard with the highest alchemy skill, he possessed the best protected laboratory in the entire central Black Tower. In this laboratory, unless the central Black Tower collapsed, his experiments would not be disturbed at all. Roar! Roar! Watching the synthetic beast in front of him gradually disintegrate, Yalad, who had been failing continuously for a month, rubbed his temples and casually summoned a flame to reduce the beast's remains to ashes. Where exactly is the problem? What exactly is missing from the notes my mentor gave me? Yalad walked to his desk, somewhat headache-stricken as he looked at his own experimental notes. Knock knock knock. Come in. The door opened, and Anna brought Richard into the laboratory. Upon entering the laboratory, Richard instantly felt a strong sense of shackles as though something was suppressing his magic power. He looked around. The entire laboratory was made of black bricks engraved with runes, and though there were several magic lights on the ceiling, the laboratory remained very dim. At the center of the laboratory was a black stone carved table, which divided the laboratory into two parts. On the right side of the laboratory, there were iron racks filled with glass containers of varying shapes, all containing a yellow liquid, within which various types of glands and organs were soaked. On the other side, the left side of the laboratory, the walls were adorned with various anatomical atlases, and between these atlases stood a huge bookshelf filled with books, notes, and even manuscripts, which looked very cluttered. Before the bookshelf stood a table where an old man with white hair was now deep in thought. Mentor, I've discovered an alchemy prodigy. Anna, leading Richard over to the old man, placed a vial of red mercury onto the experiment table. Wizard Yalad, the alchemy wizard widely recognized for accepting numerous apprentices, looked just like any ordinary old man with his graying hair, large beard, and full face of wrinkles. But this was just the surface. Richard noticed something unusual about Yalad's eyes. Deep within his eyeballs was something strange, a myriad of tiny compound eyes. Yalad opened the bottle and drew out a droplet of red mercury with a strand of magic power. This purity, quite impressive. After activating the red mercury to verify its potency, he fixed his gaze upon Richard. In a moment, it felt like Richard was completely seen through as the eyes seemed to penetrate his clothes, skin, muscle, bones, all the way to his soul. Bloodline alchemy, just became a low-level apprentice. To refine this purity of red mercury, he truly can be called a genius. Yalad withdrew his gaze, commenting in a flat tone. Anna, you brought him here presumably for him to become your disciple. I trust your judgment, but we still have to go through the necessary procedures. Having said that, Yalad pulled open a drawer of the table and, without looking, took out a crystal ball. Make this, and you're qualified. Chapter 24. Richard took the crystal ball, and after probing it with his spiritual power, he discovered a design diagram inside. This was a magic equipment design diagram named Pale Mask. Yalad, looking at the notes in his hand, spoke in an indifferent tone, make this thing, and then hand it over to me. I'll give you 3 months. If you can't make it in 3 months, it would mean that your talent isn't as good as I thought. After speaking, Yalad glanced at Richard. Do you understand? Richard nodded, I understand, Master Yalad. Then go back. I still have experiments to conduct. Yalad waved his hand, and Richard and Anna left without making a sound. Once outside, Richard patted his chest. So that's a wizard? When he looked at me, I felt like he saw right through me. Anna rolled her eyes at him. It's not that scary. The mentor saw you as a low-level apprentice, even the life radiation was restrained. Go back and properly make the magic equipment, the mask isn't hard to craft. I'll await your news in 3 months. With that, Anna strode ahead and directly leaped over the stair banister, falling freely. Whew, having levitation skill is impressive. But why do I feel like something's missing? Richard stroked his chin, then suddenly went to the edge of the banister to shout at Anna. Senior sister, you haven't given me the money yet. Once he found Anna and settled his debt with magic stones, due to the high purity of his red mercury and the possibility of them being fellow apprentices in the future, Anna gave him an additional 10 magic stones and hoped that after Richard finished crafting the magic equipment, he could refine another batch of red mercury for her. To this, Richard could only express his willingness to collaborate in the future. Seeing his pocket filled with a full 110 magic stones, Richard couldn't help but sigh. Anna was truly wealthy. She gave away over 100 magic stones without even blinking. I'm rich now, time to pay back Ollie's money first. Richard counted the magic stones in his pouch. He had been so absorbed in the library recently that he spent every last magic stone he had, and even the money he used to buy bloodline alchemy materials was borrowed from Allie. After changing the money, I'll take a stroll through the commercial district to gather the materials for crafting the magic equipment, and get started as soon as possible. Richard pumped his fist, full of determination. Returning to his dormitory, Richard knocked on the door of the next room. Knock knock knock. Who is it? It's me. Click. Allie, wearing a thin nightgown, sleepily opened the door, her eyes half closed. Richard, what is it? As Allie rubbed her eyes, her slight movements caused her nightgown to reveal quite a bit. It's nothing, I've just come to return the magic stones. Richard averted his gaze, handing a bag of magic stones to Allie. 5 magic stones, please check. Allie casually tossed the bag behind her, not even bothering to look. What for? You wouldn't cheat me. Come in and sit, I recently bought a can of Green's red tea from the commercial district. No need to sit, I just found a mentor, and he's assigned me a task. Richard mumbled a few words and turned to leave. Did you run into that woman named Anna? Hey! Richard turned around, how do you know? The scent, she had this smell on her in class that day, Allie said nonchalantly. Richard sniffed himself and indeed detected a faint aroma very similar to that of red mercury. Amazing, you could even smell that. Richard gave a thumbs up, then waved his hand and briskly walked away. Allie watched Richard's retreating figure and slammed the door shut with a bang. Standing behind the door, her cheeks were flushed with annoyance. He doesn't even come in. Is his heart made of stone? The somewhat irritated Allie stamped her feet fiercely before languidly lying down on the bed and picking up the Wizard World Almanac she had borrowed from the library. Ah, knowledge, knowledge, you are the real enchantress. How many people have you bewitched, toiling their entire lives away just for a glimpse of the tip of your iceberg? Compared to you, such an adversary, how could I ever win? Arriving at the commercial district, Richard began searching for suitable materials according to the design diagram. Inferior wind pattern stone, sticky mushrooms, black mercury, poison rhododendron ink, 10-year-old demonized wood. After wandering around the commercial district for a long time, Richard finally gathered most of the materials needed to make the pale mask, spending a total of 3,500 Academy coins, equivalent to 35 magic stones. There's still one missing, the skull of a black striped water python. Richard looked at the last item on the materials list. He had visited over a dozen shops and hadn't found it. We don't have the skull of a black striped water python here, said the clerk, shaking his head. Richard sighed upon hearing this. This was the last alchemy shop in the commercial district. Where should I obtain this item, then? Richard asked, smiling as he slipped 10 Academy coins into the clerk's hand. Once the clerk made sure no one was watching, his smile became much more genuine. Black striped water pythons have a habitat in the Blackstone mountain range. If you're in a hurry, you could go there and hunt one yourself. This magic beast isn't hard to kill for a low-level apprentice. Also, if you really intend to go there, you might want to check at the Academy's task hall to see if there are tasks for patrolling the Blackstone mountain range. Academy tasks allow you to ride the Academy's airship for free, which could save you an airship ticket. The Blackstone mountain range, huh? Thanks for the tip. Richard pondered for a moment and decided to follow the clerk's suggestion to check the task hall. The task hall was bustling with people. After searching through the list of tasks for a while, Richard found one in the Academy tasks that involved scouting the conditions of white crystals deer in the Blackstone mountain range. Richard approached the counter to take on the task. I'm sorry, but due to the danger of the task, low-level and beginner apprentices need to form a team of 2 or more to accept it, said the wizard apprentice behind the counter, looking into the crystal ball. Do I need to form a team? That could be troublesome, Richard frowned. Since coming to the academy, Richard's life could even be described as reclusive. Besides frequenting the library and dormitory, he hardly had any social interactions except with Allie. Richard massaged his temples with a slight headache. Should I ask Allie to team up? As he was pondering, suddenly a voice came from behind him. Hey, friend! Are you looking to form a team? Richard turned around to see a plump man in a wizard robe looking at him. The chubby man seemed honest and sincere. Friend, want to team up? I'm Loken, looking for someone to join me heading to the Blackstone Mountain Range. Richard turned to look at the clerk. He had just inquired about taking on the task, and now someone was asking to team up. This was too much of a coincidence. The clerk gave Richard a glance. For low-level apprentices, forming a temporary team in the hall is very common, nothing to make a fuss about. Sorry, I already have a teammate. Richard gave Loken an apologetic smile and turned to leave. Teaming up with a stranger for a mission in the wild seemed too dangerous to Richard. Returning to the dormitory, Richard once again knocked on Ali's door. Richard, what is it this time? Ali opened the door with a subtle expression. Has this blockhead finally come to his senses? Richard hesitated for a moment before speaking to Ali. I saw a task in the task hall that requires a team. Are you free lately? Oh. Ali cheered inwardly but kept a calm expression. I'm free. How's the reward divided? 300 academy coins, split evenly, Richard answered. His main task was to hunt the black-striped water python. To him now, the reward from the academy task seemed trivial. Okay, I agree. Let me change my clothes. Chapter 25. When Ali had finished changing her clothes, half an hour had already passed. Looking at the youthful and cute girl in front of him, Richard couldn't help but sigh that the best cosmetic for women was youth. When they arrived at the mission hall, Richard noticed that a fat man named Loken seemed to have already found a team. It seems common for low-level apprentices to form teams, but aren't these people worried about betraying each other? Richard thought to himself. Although the Blackstone Mountain Range was within the academy's radius, there were no academy inspectors inside, and the apprentices were no longer restricted by school regulations. Moreover, every apprentice who had successfully entered the academy had blood on their hands. In the wilderness, if his companions weren't well known to him, Richard wouldn't dare to sleep peacefully. Richard and Ali walked up to the counter to accept a mission, and after confirming their team up, the clerk briskly assigned them the mission. Let's go, pack up, tonight we'll take the flying airship. On their way, Richard felt that Ali kept glancing at him, but whenever he looked back at her, she quickly averted her gaze. Is there something on my face? Richard asked. No. Then why do you keep looking at me? Who's looking at you? Don't flatter yourself. I was looking at the street lights. Richard shook his head, unable to understand the girl's thoughts. Next time, he would record her with a recording crystal and see if she still denied it. Back at the dorm, besides packing clothes, Richard also armed himself thoroughly. He carried a great sword on his back, wore an arm bracelet, an ice cone ring on his finger, a magic dagger at his waist, and finally picked up the fireball magic wand. Richard's gear was now complete. After packing, Richard and Ali headed to the airship field located outside the academy. There were many apprentices at the airship field, and Richard, with his sharp eyes, saw the team joined by the fat man Loken. Boarding a Zeppelin-type magic airship, Richard was exempted from the airship ticket after showing the mission proof, earning envious glances from the surrounding apprentices. The price of an airship ticket was not cheap, starting at 1 magic stone and going up to 5 or 6 for farther places. Ali looked at the ticket price on the airship. Richard, how did you know that taking academy missions could get us free tickets? If they really had to pay for the tickets, the two of them would need 4 magic stones to go to the Blackstone Mountain Range, which would cost more than the reward itself. And the airship ticket seller didn't give any hints about this rule. Secret. This passenger airship was different from the recruitment airships. Instead of individual compartments, it had rows of wooden seats. Richard and Ali's seats were by the window. Sitting down, Ali, who was accustomed to sleeping, yawned and leaned against Richard, closing her eyes. Looking at Allie, who fell asleep instantly, Richard helplessly took a piece of clothing from their luggage and draped it over her. The moonlight outside the window was bright, and when it shone through the window onto Allie's face, it seemed to veil her face with a layer of gauze. Sleeping like this is such a waste. The efficiency doesn't feel as good as meditation. The flying airship was fast, and they reached the distant Blackstone mountain range in half a night. When the morning sun shone into the airship, Richard moved his shoulders and woke Allie up. "Wake up, we're here." So soon?" Allie yawned and stretched languidly, then followed Richard off the airship. The airship docked near a small town inhabited by quite a few ordinary humans. Loken's team also disembarked with Richard, but they seemed very familiar with the Blackstone mountain range and headed straight for it. As soon as they entered the small town, several people immediately approached Richard and Allie. "Wizard sir, do you need a guide? I am very familiar with the Blackstone mountain range." "Wizard sir, I know the Blackstone mountain range the best, just a quarter of a magic stone, and I guarantee your mission will be completed quickly and smoothly." "Master Wizard, don't listen to them, Seeing the guides crowded together, Richard coughed. "Quiet down, everyone. We're here to survey the survival status of the white crystal deer, as well as to hunt a magic beast known as the black striped water python. Which of you are familiar with these two creatures?" Richard's words made the guides fall silent. They were indifferent to the white crystal deer, but very few among them had ever seen the black striped water python. "Master Wizard, I'm familiar with the white crystal deer, but I've only seen the black striped water python once in the past 6 months, and I don't know if it's still around that area." An old guide with a head of white hair but full of energy stood out among the guides, and none of the others dared to steal his business. Helplessly, the assignments under a wizard were lucrative but risky, and if they felt they were being fooled, even the city lord couldn't protect them. "All right, it's you then. How many magic stones?" "Half a magic stone is enough, Master Wizard." "What's your name?" "You can just call me Old John, Master Wizard." The transaction completed, Old John didn't waste any time and immediately led the two towards Blackstone mountain range. In the morning, the Blackstone mountain range was covered in mist, and from afar it appeared as if a dark beast lurked within the white fog. Old John led the two along a mountain path deep into the Blackstone mountain range. Along the way, various uniquely shaped plants and insects kept Richard and his companion from turning away. "Master Wizard, is this your first visit to Blackstone mountain range?" Richard, who had just finished collecting some plants, turned and looked towards Old John. "Indeed it is." "Haha, I could tell you two were first-timers from the way you act," laughed Old John, reaching into the nearby brush and pulling out a mushroom. "Master Wizard, never mind those little toys, look at this mushroom Old John has." Richard took the mushroom and with a probe of his spiritual power, discovered that it actually contained magic. "What is this?" Richard asked in surprise. Old John shook his head. "I don't know what it is either, just that I often see other wizards picking this when they come to the mountain." Richard, sensing the hint, carefully pocketed the mushroom and took out a magic stone from his belt pocket, which still had 1/5 of its magic power left. "Later, take us to see other things that wizards often pick." Old John with a beaming smile accepted the magic stone. "All right, Old John guarantees you'll be satisfied, sir." Blackstone mountain range was vast, stretching over thousands of kilometers, even extending beyond the Academy's bounds. As the moon climbed into the sky, after walking in the mountain for a day, Richard and his party started a campfire in the forest. Richard and Allie sat quietly in front of the campfire, watching Old John show off his cooking skills. Having been a guide for decades, Old John mastered his duties, noting that Richard and his companion were first-timers at Blackstone mountain range and were unprepared. Along the way, he began preparing game meat for dinner. As Old John smoothed a layer of secret spices over the golden brown skin of the mountain chicken, a thick fragrance burst forth as the greasy skin sizzled. "It smells so good." Allie sniffed, eagerly watching the roasting chicken. At that moment, Richard felt a bit greedy too, although he had prepared dry rations. Who would prefer them over delicious roast meat? Just as the two were indulging their appetites, sudden noises echoed from the woods. The keen-eared Old John looked alertly towards the woods, suddenly thrusting the barbecue into the ground. "Both of you, someone is approaching and we may need to fight. Old John won't hold you back." With that, Old John's figure vanished into the woods in an instant. And not long after he disappeared, rustling sounds came from the forest in front of Richard. A figure, covered in blood, emerged from the woods.